Hello and welcome to My Baseball History, presented by the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum and Baseball Library in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm your host, Dan Wallach, and I'm the Executive Director of the museum. My Baseball History is a long-form interview podcast where each episode I'll talk to someone new who has some sort of association to the game of baseball. No matter who I talk to, we'll talk about how they fell in love with baseball, how their career started, and how they got to be where they are today. On today's episode, I spoke with Lester Erwin. For the first episode of each season of My Baseball History, I want to have the interview be deeply relevant to Shoeless Joe Jackson. As you may have noticed throughout season 1 of the show, I'll pepper in references and stories during the other episodes when it's appropriate, but I really try to keep this show about baseball history and baseball in general. However, I reserve the premiere episode of each season for something that's strictly Joe. The first interview episode of season 1 was with Mike Miller, who is a Shoeless Joe Jackson historian and expert from Greenville, South Carolina. If you haven't taken the opportunity to listen to that episode yet, carve out some time this week and do that. Mike told us the real story of exactly how and exactly when Joe got the nickname Shoeless, among countless other great stories, all told from his unique perspective, having grown up in the same mill communities which Joe and his family were raised all those years ago. The first episode of season 2 is just as special. Lester Erwin was born in the Camperdown Mill community of Greenville, South Carolina. Lester's interest in Shoeless Joe started at a very early age. His mother, Katie, and Shoeless Joe's wife, Katie, were first cousins. Lester's family would often visit with the Jacksons when he was a child. He would spend a lot of time in Joe's office or playing outside where Joe and his dad would be talking. Whenever he would visit, Lester would notice and appreciate a particular baseball bat leaning up against Joe's desk in the corner of his office. Years later, after Katie Jackson passed away, Lester received that old bat as specified in Katie's will. You may have actually heard of it, because the bat was pretty famous in its own right. You probably know it as Black Betsy. In this episode, we cover lots of ground. Lester tells us precisely how he came to own one of the most famous bats in the history of baseball. We find out why sometimes sentimental value is worth much more than monetary value. We learn that it's always good to double-check the attic before you leave a house for the last time. And we hear stories of what it was like for Lester as a little kid to visit Shoeless Joe and his wife Katie in the house that is now our museum. With all of that information and much, much more coming at you, it may be helpful to follow along with the episode's liner notes on our website. You'll still be able to enjoy the interview without the extra help, but sometimes when I'm listening to things like this, I like to really go in depth. So I've provided some photos and links to give you a better understanding of the things Lester and I are discussing. Those liner notes can be found at the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum website, which is online at www.shoelessjoejackson.org. If you want to follow along, head over to the museum's website and click on the podcast tab at the top. You can also head straight to shoelessjoejackson.org/shoelesspodcast, and it will take you right to the page where you can click on the Lester Erwin episode or any past episode you might want to catch up on. Everything in the liner notes goes in chronological order of how we talked about them in the interview, so you should easily be able to keep your place as you listen. At the end of the episode, I'll explain how you can answer a trivia question on Twitter to win our biggest giveaway of the season, so stick around until the end of the episode for that. But now, here's my interview with Lester Erwin. Thanks for having me. This is a dream come true to be sitting in this room with some of these pieces and with you.
Yeah.
I've known your name since way before I had any involvement with the museum, so to know that like I'm sitting here right now with you is pretty wild to me.
Well, I'm glad you've known my name that long, and you're still willing to come and meet with me.
I've only wanted to get to meet you even more as the years have gone on. It hasn't lessened. It's increased. You were born in the Camperdown Mill community of Greenville, South Carolina in 1946. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like to grow up there and what the mill communities were like?
The mill communities were simply amazing. And then I didn't really realize it, obviously, but looking back, I couldn't ask for anything any better. We had our own community, obviously, just like the other mills around this upper part of the state and everywhere else. But we were like a family, really, truly like a family. A lot of people say that, but they're not sincere and they don't really mean it. But we were. I mean, there were probably 12 or 14, 15 kids within 2 years age of each other. and we had our own little gang kind of around the neighborhood, and we kind of rode our bikes all over the neighborhood, and if we had any problems, we could go in anybody's home. If we caused any problems, we could be disciplined by anybody's home. And we would spend the night with each other. We'd eat with each other. And, of course, we all attended the same church. And there was a school right across from our church where the school district office is now. And that's where most of us went the first or second grade, and then that school closed down. But it was really a close-knit community, and like I said, probably 90% of the people in that community went to the same church, although there was another church in the community as well. But the majority of those people worked at the mill. My dad ran a dope wagon. For those that don't know, that's like a canteen. But he had a wagon that an ice box that actually had ice in it with drinks, and then a cage on top with the snacks and sandwiches. And he pushed that thing through the mill 3 times a day.
Wow.
Fortunately, it wasn't fortunate back then because people lost their jobs, but when it did close down and he found another job where he was working 2 shifts a day, and it took him about 45 minutes instead of about an hour and a half, the mill closing down probably gave him another 20 years of life.
Wow.
The memories we have of the mill community are everlasting, and obviously around the upstate now, almost every mill has their own textile community, textile mill society, and the Greenville Textile Heritage Society is over that. They're building a textile heritage park over in the old Monacan area. They have big plans for doing something great for the textile people.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the mills around the area are either getting refurbished or completely renovated. It happened with Brandon Mill. It seems like a lot of the other mills are up next and on some sort of timeline. So what do you think about that? Is it ruining the history or is it preserving it? What does somebody from the mill communities think of these buildings turning into luxury apartments and things like that?
I'm ecstatic about it.
Yeah.
I'm thankful that they're able to save those old buildings and turn them into something nice that people will live in and take care of. And, we don't have a whole lot left from the Camperdown community. We have a church, a couple of markers around Reedy River, but we're obviously having a pretty big project being built downtown right now across from the Peace Center.
Right.
That's going to be named Camperdown.
Right.
Because the guy whose company is building it was one of our buddies that we grew up together. He was from the other side of the track, so to speak, because we all went to Greenville High and he went to Parker. But they came to church. His mother was from the Camperdown area, and they came to church every week and got to know him real well. And I think a couple of his aunts told him when he was telling them about it, said, "Well, you're going to call it Camperdown," and that's what it's going to be. But that's something that's going to be there forever, pretty much, as a lasting monument to our Camperdown community.
Yeah, and that's important. I love stuff like that. There wasn't a major league team nearby when you were growing up, so were you into Major League Baseball? Did you have a favorite team? Did you have favorite players? Who were you rooting for?
Absolutely. I rooted for the team that was on television almost every Saturday, the New York Yankees. And it's kind of funny that you asked that because someone posted something on Facebook last night of a picture of Dizzy Dean and Pee Wee Reese. That's who we always were the broadcasters on Saturday.
Right.
Fell in love with those guys. And, of course, like I said, the Yankees were pretty good back then in the early 50s and 60s.
Right.
So they were on just about every Saturday down here. I love Mickey Mantle. He's always been my hero on the baseball field, and I liked all the rest of them. We had a local guy, Bobby Richardson, played for him and had a great career.
Right.
And so that made it a little bit more like home, or having somebody involved. So, yeah, I followed baseball from the time I was old enough to know what baseball was.
We'll get to this later on, but it must have been kind of a thrill for you to have Bobby Richardson be part of the museum, the opening ceremonies and things like that. One of your childhood heroes to come back and be a part of that.
Absolutely. It's always good to be at an event with Bobby Richardson. He is one of the classiest gentlemen that I've ever met.
Yeah.
He's lived his life the way it should be lived. He played professionally the way it should be played, and he's been a big influence not only on me but on a lot of people throughout his life.
Absolutely. You played first base for Greenville High School and then 4 years of baseball at Newberry College. What was the greatest achievement of your baseball career as a player?
Well, I never looked at it individually. It was always like a team, and I've told people I was very fortunate to be born when I was born, and be born where I was born. The 50s were just a great time to be alive and to be a young person.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd go to bed at night and we'd leave our front door wide open. We'd leave our windows wide open. When my parents went to work, when we were in school, we didn't all have a key. They put the key in the mailbox, and when we came home from school, we got the key out of the mailbox and went in the house. So it was a lot simpler time, but I was also very blessed to be able to be at Greenville High whenever I was, because we had a great group of guys that came forward. We were fortunate enough to win the state championship in basketball my junior and senior year. They had also won it my freshman year and came within 1 point of winning it my sophomore year.
Dang.
And then baseball, we won the conference every year. And in American Legion baseball, we were runners-up in the state all 3 years I played. Just couldn't ever win the big one, I guess. But individually, I was fortunate to be named co-most valuable player my last year of Legion ball. But I was just proud to be a part of that group of guys that put so much on the field and worked so hard to achieve so much.
Winning seems to be kind of a trend for you because you also coached for 23 years, and your teams won their conference championship 7 times. You won the 3A state championship in 1983. Your team had a record of 25-1 that year. You were named Conference Coach of the Year 8 times and had 29 of your former players go on to play college baseball, with 4 of them eventually signing professional contracts. So winning just seems to be a constant pattern in your life.
I learned early from the example that my father set. There's no substitute for hard work, because I saw he was at work every morning at 6 o'clock. He, in the summertime, whenever I was out of school or whenever before I went to school, he would get a break in the middle of the morning after the first shift, and he would always go. That's when he would go to the bank. He would come home and get me, and at the bank there was a little canteen, and we always got us a sandwich and a milkshake, and that was about the extent during the week that I saw him, except for meals. And then he would go back and work 2 more shifts and not get home till 9 o'clock at night. But I saw the hard work that he put in and never heard him complain. And my mother also. My mother sat at a sewing machine 8 hours a day hemming garments. Talk about something that has to be the most boring thing in the world, and stressful and had to hurt your hands. But she never complained. She went to work every day. And so I realized that through hard work you can achieve a lot. And I carried it over into my playing days. I carried it over into my coaching days. I'm actually working a little part-time job now with Mastar Signs here in Powdersville. And there's 4 guys there that played ball for me 40 years ago. And they throw it up in my face quite often about how tough it was. But
do they make you run suicides?
They would love to. They would really love to. But it's all in good fun because they realized, they understood then, and they understand now just how important the hard work was.
Is there a single moment or a single player that you look back on as your coaching career, and when you think like this is the pinnacle achievement or a shining example of what coaching meant to you?
The obvious response would be the year we won the state championship. About 3 years before that, we had finished our season losing in the first round of the playoffs, and one of the seniors stepped up and spoke. They said, you young guys don't know how much you can achieve. Said you got to believe in the system. And you got to do the system, and you got to work hard. Well, 3 years later, we won the state championship, and that was a special team. I mean, we had 3 pitchers that I've never seen 3 pitchers that good on the team. And the good thing about it, 2 of them were left-handed. And we had a senior, a junior, and a sophomore. Well, 2 of those went on to play college ball and play professional ball. That would be the obvious answer. And again, one more thing about that, we lost the 3rd game of the season, and then came back and beat Burns the 2nd time around and won 22 in a row to win the state championship. But the one thing that you're talking about that really sticks in my mind, we had a young man that played several years after that, and he was a quarterback on the football team, just a hard worker and an outstanding athlete from a great family. And he developed a heart problem, had to have open heart surgery, couldn't play football. And we weren't sure he was going to play baseball, but he worked hard, and he came back. And when he came back, I wasn't sure about how to handle that because I knew how tough I was going to be. But I basically told him, I said, listen, you do what you can do. And if you tell me you can't do it or you can't go any further at this point in time, you tell me, and you can stop. I said, your health is the most important thing. He probably had the greatest season of any player ever that I had. I mean, his batting average was well over 400. He pitched outstandingly. He was a conference player of the year, and the hard work that he put in and the example he led by with those other guys was just amazing. I mean, I still get goosebumps thinking about it.
Yeah, that's incredible.
That even more so than all the wins and all the championships and the coaches of the year and all that kind of stuff. That kind of thing has probably been the one highlight that if I had to pick out one.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it is.
So your mother was Katie Jackson's first cousin. What was Katie like as a person?
Katie, to me, at that age, you got to remember now, Joe died when I just turned 5.
Mm-hmm.
So Katie lived another 8 years. So I was 12 or 13 when she passed away.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, Katie kind of scared me. And I don't know why. It's not because of anything she ever did.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember her ever scolding me
Right.
or fussing at me. She just had that look like, you don't want to mess with me.
Well, she kept Joe in line for all those years.
Well,
so she must have...
absolutely. So she must have had something going for her.
Right.
But no, she was really a sweet lady.
Yeah.
And when we would go visit, my mother and Katie would sit inside in the living room
Mm-hmm.
on the couch, and always together on the couch. And my dad and Joe would sit outside in lawn chairs. And that one picture you see of Joe sitting outside in that lawn chair
Mm-hmm.
with his little dog, that's the lawn chair I remember seeing him sit in.
Right.
And they never sat in the side or outside together. They were
Mm-hmm.
always separate, which leads me to believe, and I don't really remember this, but we probably never did visit much in cold weather in the wintertime. It
Yeah,
was
that
probably
makes sense.
in spring, summer, and that
Yeah.
type of thing.
That photo, was that taken during Furman Bisher's visit for the 1949 Sport magazine article?
It may have been. I don't know. It's not one that we took.
Right.
So it could very well have been
Yeah,
so.
because there's a handful of photos that he's kind of wearing the same outfit in
Yeah,
all of them. So
yeah.
I feel like it must
and
have...
they're pretty much all out in the yard.
Or around Greenville, too.
Yeah,
There's one
right.
in like the gas station and one at the general store. You know,
Right, yeah.
So yeah, I think he was kind of like taking him around to show him how much, everybody in Greenville knows who he is. And
Right.
so yeah, I think it was kind of more of like a professional photo shoot without
Sure.
being one, Yeah.
Yeah.
In the summers, like, you and your family would go visit Joe and Katie, and you would wander off into the room where Joe kept his mementos and trophies and an old hickory baseball bat, which had been stained brown with tobacco juice. I read that you used to pretend Joe's leg was third base and slide into it while he and your dad were talking out in the backyard. I know that you were only 5 when he passed away, but what do you remember about those visits and about Joe? Do you have any lasting memories of him?
That memory you just mentioned is the biggest one that I have of as far as being around him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did do that, and I know people are going to look back, and I've always said this. People look back and say, "Well, how can you remember that? You were just 5 or a little less than 5." Honestly, I remember that a lot more distinctly and clearly than I remember yesterday. in some cases,
Yeah.
because of who it was,
Right.
and at that time, I really didn't know anything about Joe except that he had played professional baseball.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I knew.
Yeah.
But most of the time I spent in his little office, and as you walked in the door, right there to the left at the door, there was a desk. The bat always was propped right at the corner of the desk and the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure it had been there for there's no telling how many years, and
Right.
that's probably how it developed a little bend in it.
Yeah.
I'm sure I played with it some. I don't remember playing with that predominantly when I was there. I spent more time just going through scrapbooks and things like that and looking at pictures and just seeing everything he had in there. But again, if you could go back, if you knew then what you knew now, there's so much more that I'd be looking for trying to see and find out.
So at what age did you realize that your uncle wasn't just some old ball player named Joe Jackson, but that he was Shoeless Joe, who had this incredible story?
I don't know what age it was. It was probably when I became a teenager, and I don't even know how it happened, but I found a box of newspaper clippings that my mom and dad had cut out of the paper and saved. If not all of the clippings were about Joe, the majority of them were about Joe. And I started looking through those and reading about those. So I asked my dad about it. I said, what is this all about Joe? Because I had no idea.
Were you like, why did you never tell me about this?
Yeah, yeah. I was just kind of wondering why this never came up.
Right.
And he kind of told me what was going on, what I hadn't read in the articles, and that's where I got my first real knowledge about Joe and the situation that he had been through. And I did ask Dad one time, I said, well, what did Joe say about it? And he said, Joe never said anything about it. He said, I never asked him, and he never said anything. He said, I wasn't going to ask him about it. He said, I figured that if he wanted to talk about it, he would have brought it up to me, and I wasn't going to pry in that part of his life.
Yeah. I've heard that from a handful of people. I wonder if Joe always felt that tension whenever he was with somebody after that, because, I mean, obviously people were curious and wanted to know, but I don't know too many people who have been like, yeah, I asked him, and this is what he said. So do you think he felt that heavy, like the weight of that awkwardness every time he was with somebody new for his entire life?
Well, it's almost like even in this day and time, if you're around somebody that something had happened between the two of you somewhere in the past, it never had really been resolved.
Right.
And you sit down like we are across from each other, carrying on a conversation, and in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking, well, when are they going to ask?
Right.
When is it going to come up?
The
And when
elephant
are we
in the
gonna
room.
when are we going to get it out in the open?
Right.
And I would imagine if he didn't feel that way, then he's a lot better man than most people are.
Yeah.
Because if he didn't feel that way, then he had just basically put it out of his mind.
Yeah.
And he wasn't worried about it. I'm sure he wasn't worried about it, but you would have to think that every time he sat down with someone, there were probably only a handful of people that he felt comfortable with that he thought would not ask him.
Right.
And he was always waiting for the question to be asked.
Right. Yeah. Growing up in the area, was Joe revered as a legend because he had made it to major leagues, or was his name kind of tarnished because of the involvement in the Black Sox scandal? Or was it one of those things where it was just like, this all happened 30 years ago, nobody even remembers it anymore, and we don't talk about it?
I don't think his name was tarnished around this area. I think people knew him for who he was. They knew what kind of man he was.
So is that how he was viewed in the community? It wasn't former ball player Joe Jackson, it was community member Joe
I
Jackson?
think the former ball player was part of it, but I think the community member was a bigger part of it.
Yeah.
After a period of time, once he traveled around wherever he went after he got out of Major League Baseball, playing ball all over the Southeast and living in Savannah and other places like that.
Right.
I think once he came back to Greenville, everybody knew he was a Major League Baseball player. Everybody knew he was one of the best to ever play the game. But when he got involved with the businesses that they opened up in Greenville and he became a community member, I think people saw him for the type of man he was. I do remember that he was always very kind to me. He was always a gentleman. I mean, I couldn't tell that as the way he reacted to me or acted toward me.
Right.
But the way he carried himself and the soft-spoken and the way he acted, you could just look at him and see that he was a gentleman.
You kind of mentioned that you came across some boxes in your attic at a certain point. Is that what all the newspaper clippings and everything that was in there, or were there other things as well?
The box that I found at my parents' home was just like a small box that like you'd wrap a Christmas present in, or a birthday present in. And then I started collecting anything I saw in the newspaper or anything I heard saw in a magazine. I kept it. And as you can see around you, I've kept a lot of stuff, but other than Joe stuff. But I tried to keep as much stuff as I could find.
Right.
Really, nothing from the time Katie passed away. Well, of course, not long after Katie passed away is whenever the gentleman from the mortuary came and brought the bat.
Right.
You may have a question about
that.
Yeah,
we'll get to it.
but no, other than that when Katie passed away, obviously, it just kind of became an afterthought, so to speak. I mean, except for things that I saw in the newspaper and magazines.
So you said in an interview years ago that reading about the Black Sox scandal was some kind of a shock to you. Your quote was, "This guy I had visited, all of a sudden to find out he'd been through this kind of a situation." So you've obviously done your own research on Joe's life and career since then. What are some of the things that intrigue you most about him today?
The biggest thing for me is the way he handled himself after the fact. He never seemed to be bitter from the times I was around him. My dad never talked about him seeming to be bitter. He always had a love for kids, even though he and Katie didn't have any kids. He just went about his life. He didn't draw up into a corner somewhere and feel sorry for himself, even though he contended that he was innocent for the rest of his life, even to his dying day. He didn't just shrink away and hide somewhere and say, well, I don't want to see people and I don't want people to see me and I don't want to be around people because they're going to judge me. He went on living his life and being a very successful business person and also being a very good person for the community and part of the community.
Yeah, he just seemed like he was at peace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every story I've ever heard, every encounter, it just seemed like he was such an easygoing person, and he knew what he had done or not done, and he knew the way he had played and what happened, and it didn't matter what you thought of him because he knew what he was.
Right, absolutely,
so,
yeah. And that has to be, to me, that has to be someone that is content with what has happened in his life, and also knowing the truth about what happened in his life.
Right.
If he was guilty, he could probably fake that over a period of time, especially after a long period of time. But if somebody really paid close attention, you could probably feel it
Yeah,
from
you
him.
pick up tendencies.
Even if it may not have anything to do with the Black Sox, he may be a little bit defensive on some subjects. From what I understand, in the times we were around him, he never was. I think the way he lived out his life after this was probably the most important thing to me as far as making an impression on me.
Yeah. What were some of Katie's favorite stories to tell about Joe? Did she talk about him a lot?
As I told you, she scared me. I don't remember sitting around and talking with her and my mother. And as you know, honestly, I didn't sit around and talk while my dad and Joe were talking either. I was out there every now and then pretending to play baseball, or I may just run out there just for the heck of it. But I just stayed in his office where his memorabilia was.
Yeah. Do you know if Katie or the rest of the family were hesitant to talk about his White Sox playing days or his major league career as a whole, or was that just part of the story?
I think it got to a point in time where she didn't want it to be brought up anymore. And I know pretty much now a lot of the family just wants to let it die.
Yeah.
And I can understand that, but at the same time, it bothers me that he may not be able to get his just dues because of that. You know, we may not be able to take him to the next level and get him in the Hall of Fame, or even just get his name cleared.
Right.
Because it's going to have to be something that we're going to have a unified front.
Right.
And something we can approach people to get that done.
Yeah. I totally understand from the family's perspective of it's been 100 years. How much more do you want us to defend what happened when they weren't even there necessarily? So they can only say what they have heard. It must be frustrating and just tiresome at this point to have the same conversation over and over. And it doesn't matter what you say because whoever you're talking to comes in with their preconceived notions anyways. So it doesn't matter how strongly you protest what their claims are. They're going to walk away from that conversation thinking what they thought anyways.
That's true. And I've run into that in our crusade to get Joe's name cleared and get him in the Hall of Fame. And I have had some communications with some Major League Baseball executives and some that were former baseball players, pretty good baseball players that held some high offices in the baseball. And they just flat came back and told me, said, you might as well just give up. They said, nothing's ever going to change about this. He's never going to go in the Hall of Fame. You might as well just leave it alone and go on and live your life. And, of course, that just makes us want to work that much harder and keep working till we find the right person that's going to listen and agree with us somewhat to open the door for him.
Katie passed away in 1959, and she left quite a bit of money to some charities. I think that says a lot, one, about the type of community members that the Jacksons were, but then two, how good Katie was with their money, that she was able to live comfortably for almost a decade without Joe's income and still have so much left over to hand out after she passed away. Do you know anything about where she got that business sense and how she was able to turn what Joe and she had built into this very comfortable life for them?
I honestly don't know a whole lot about the family she came from because that was a lot of that was before I was even born. Right. But I imagine she may have just learned on the fly, and she was kind of shrewd, and she may have been one that would save a penny. Obviously, she did. I think she did most of the business sense part of it, and Joe probably chimed in some, but she probably ran the show and took care of things, and just was able to put money aside as they went along, and, which a lot of people nowadays would be a lot better off if they were able to do that.
Yep, me too. Another thing that Katie gave away at the time of her passing was Black Betsy. That's obviously Joe's favorite baseball bat, and you're the one that she gave it to. Of all their friends, of all their family, all the people in Greenville or Savannah or Cleveland or Chicago who knew Joe or were teammates of his or just loved and respected him, why do you think that you were the person that was given that bat?
I think it was maybe for a couple of reasons. I think one, because we would visit them, and I would obviously show how much I enjoyed the bat and how much I enjoyed Joe's memorabilia. But I think it was probably mostly because of her love for my mother. They were very close. My mother was named after her, and they were always very close. So I think that probably had as much to do with it as anything else.
And do you think Joe and Katie thought that Black Betsy had monetary value, or was it just, this is my favorite bat, so it means something to me, so it must mean something to somebody who I care about? Was it that? As
I recall, it was the only bat that he had there at the house that I ever saw. And of course, I doubt if they thought it had monetary value. Lord, I never did.
Right.
Whenever the executor of the estate brought it to my house and gave it to me, yeah, I was ecstatic. I was pleased to have it just because it had belonged to Joe.
Right.
But as far as I knew, it was just a bat. Now, I never took it out in the backyard and hit rocks with it. I knew better than that. But I put it in our home. And one of my good friends that I played high school basketball and baseball with, his dad made me a couple of stands to set it on, which I still have here somewhere, the stands. So I put it on that in our den, and it stayed there until we sold it, except for 1 month. We loaned it to the museum downtown. They were doing an exhibit on textiles, and they wanted to use it, and I gave it to them for that. Other than that, it stayed there. When Daddy died, obviously, it came to my home on the same little standards that he had it set on, the pedestals, and stayed there and never went anywhere else until we took it to Washington and until we took it to the Field of Dreams.
Right.
And it did go downtown a few times to some events downtown and things like that. But even up to that time, I never had any earthly idea it was worth anything.
You knew that it had some cachet and that it,
oh yeah,
people loved seeing it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, people just lit up whenever they saw it, especially little kids.
Right.
When we went to the Field of Dreams, we took the American Legion baseball team out there for a tournament, and after we played our first ball game, we played like at 10 o'clock in the morning, and so when we got through, we went straight to the Field of Dreams. When we got there was one family on the field. There's a mom and a dad and two small kids. Our guys were excited. They just hit the field, and they started playing catch and walking around and looking at everything and seeing everything. And I looked around, and they weren't anywhere around this family, but you could just kind of tell the family was kind of shying away because they didn't want to get their kids involved in that. So I walked over to them, and I told them who we were, and I had the bat, and I said, if you'd like to get a picture with your family and the bat, and I said, I'll be glad to take it for you. And of course they just lit up. Yeah. And we got them a picture, and they took that, and they were ecstatic. They were ecstatic. Yeah, they couldn't believe they happened to be there the same time we showed up. But it's been like that a lot of places. Some
of the episodes that we did in season 1 talk about Field of Dreams. I did an interview with one of the tour guides from Field of Dreams, and another person that I met that day. I went to the field to interview the tour guide, and as I walked out of the house, I ran into an artist who I had been following for a long time, and we figured out a time to interview too. And it's just whether it comes up organically or if I'm asking somebody a specific question because they're related to the site or the movie in some way, it seems like everybody has a Field of Dreams story, and that place is just a magical place. So to know that you gave somebody that story for the rest of their lives, that must feel pretty cool.
That is, as far as my coaching in American Legion, that is one of my highlights. A local gentleman here, John Burgess, who owns Southeastern Products, he was Joe's paperboy whenever he was young, and he was obviously a big supporter of Joe's. And I don't know how he got hooked up with the guys from the Field of Dreams, the Ghost Players and those guys, but he contacted me, and he said, Lester, he said, we're trying to set up a situation where we can have a national American Legion baseball tournament at the Field of Dreams. And he said, would you be interested in taking your team? I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, I'm gonna send you and Joe Thompson and Joe Anders. And then there was a guy from Columbia at that time was over the American Legion baseball. Okay. He said, I'm going to send y'all out there to talk to these folks about setting up a tournament. Well, we went in February, and we flew in. Our flight I don't even know where we flew in, but it obviously wasn't in Dyersville. Right. But we got a van, and we drove into Dyersville, and you know the scene at the end of the Christmas Story, after the kids have opened up the presents and the snow and the ice are glittering around the house. There was a fine layer of snow on the ground, and the moonlight was just shining through. I mean, it just took me back to that scene, and it was like we had passed the Mendoza line or something, and we were in another time frame. Right. It was like it was magical. Yeah. And I told those guys, I said, hey, this is not like where we just came from. Right. And, of course, we met with those guys for a few minutes that night and then went to our motel room, and we met with them the next day, and they took us out to the Field of Dreams. There was snow on the ground, and we got to talk to one of the guys that was on his half of the field, or however that worked. But yeah, it was magical. It was a magical place. And then we went back 2 years to play in the tournament, and
Cool.
I can honestly say I got to play catch with my two sons, and that was a highlight of the day.
Yeah, amazing. Back to Black Betsy then. Can you tell us the exact history of the bat to the best of your knowledge? I've read reports that it was made anywhere between 1901 and 1908. What do you know to be the true origin story of that bat?
I don't know dates, but the story that I've always heard is that it was made by a streetcar driver here in Greenville, and he made the bat for him, and out of hickory. After he gave it to Joe, and it was stained with the tobacco juice and all that kind of good stuff, Joe ended up taking it to, I believe, Spalding. I don't know why they would do it, but for some reason they put their trademark on it. And basically, that's all I know. Whenever I got it, it had electrical tape around the handle, pieces of electrical tape. It wasn't all the way up like a bat would nowadays, but it had broken off and peeled off and that type of thing. It also had one thing that was really curious for me was the fact that it had a metal strip up, I'm assuming, through the handle to try to keep it from breaking. I don't know how far up. I hate to say this. I don't know how far up the bat that may have gone, but it was like maybe a quarter of an inch wide and maybe an eighth of an inch thick.
Yeah.
And but you could see it right there at the on the end of the bat, and I'm thinking, well, that's not got to be legal. But you see people talk about Black Betsy and Joe used Black Betsy. Well, I don't honestly think he actually used that bat in the major leagues very often, if at all.
Tons of people over the years have claimed to have an authentic game-used Joe Jackson bat, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. But to the best of our knowledge, there is only one actual Black Betsy, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And he did have other bats, obviously, and most of those bats were also given specific names, right?
From what I understand, yes.
What were some of the other names of Joe's bats that you're aware of, and were any of them still around by the time you were visiting Joe and Katie, or was it just the Black Betsy?
I don't remember ever seeing another bat in his house, and I think he maybe called one Blonde Betsy. But other than that, I don't know.
Wasn't there one named Big Jim or something
could
like
have been,
that? Yeah.
Could have been. I know Mike Nola had been in contact with Louisville Slugger. He approached him about making him one of their models, Joe Jackson models.
Right.
And whenever he did that, and it probably been 20 years ago, I think they told him that whenever they made that next bat and used that mold, that would have been the second time, I think it was, that they had used that mold since they did it for Joe.
Wow.
And, of course, I've got two over there against the wall behind you that I got from Mike. I've seen the same stories that you've seen, that you referred to a few minutes ago, that people had game-used bats, and they very well could. I'm sure that if they decided to sell it, they'd have to go through some extensive investigation and testing to prove it.
A lot of the ones that I've seen, people claim that they're barnstorming bats and things like, because back then players didn't keep bats. You know, there wasn't the same memorabilia mindset as basically starting with Babe Ruth in the early 1920s of people are so interested in what he's doing, and baseball became such a big part of the American culture that people wanted to keep mementos and have people sign baseballs for him. Before 1920, that stuff wasn't really the case. So since Joe's major league career ended in 1920, all that stuff that happened before that wasn't kept and wasn't treasured the way that we would today.
Nobody knew that, so they didn't have any sense of urgency to try to keep it.
Right.
So the majority of it, if not all of it, probably just went by the wayside and was thrown away or destroyed somewhere along the line.
Right.
Sadly.
Such a shame.
Yeah,
absolutely.
sadly.
Obviously, today we do look at sports memorabilia as collectible and sometimes super valuable. So at what point did you know that Black Betsy was something of possible monetary value instead of just an heirloom from a family member who used to play baseball?
Well, I never had any intention of selling it. One Christmas, my wife and I and her brother decided we were going to sell Christmas trees, which was okay, but it was a one-shot deal, and we never did it again. But I had a gentleman that came to me while we were at the Christmas tree lot, and he was an uncle or a cousin of one of the guys that had played American Legion baseball with me that had actually gone to the Field of Dreams. He lived in Lawrence, and he said, I don't know if you're interested in this or not. He said, but I'm getting ready to sell some memorabilia. I told the guy about your bat, and he's interested. would you be interested in selling? I said, well, I've never really even thought about selling the bat.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, I'll tell you what, I said, I'll be glad to talk to him and just see what he's got to say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have mixed feelings about this now. Obviously, I wish that bat was still sitting on that bookshelf right over there.
Mm-hmm.
But he came and we talked, and he said, we can do this, we can get this amount, we can do this and this and this. And he said, I'll have to take it, and they'll have to do some testing and different stuff like that. And I said, well, okay, let's just pursue it and see what happens. And he came back with a price, and I talked to my wife, and she said, hey, it's your bat. You do what you want to.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to my two sons, and the key word there is two. And what's going to happen whenever something happens to me.
Right.
I know they wouldn't have argued over the bat, but would they have known how to handle about possibly selling the bat if that's what they wanted to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then before I made a final decision, I actually went to lunch with Joe Thompson and Joe Anders. I said, if they give me the green light, I said, then I feel like I can be comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him what was going on. And Joe Anders looked square in my eye, and he said, Lester, he said, I wouldn't even hesitate. He said, I'd sell it in a heartbeat for that kind of money.
Yeah.
And so we went through the process and got it, and obviously we went through the auction, and we got it sold. And we didn't get as much money as they said we were going to get, or as much as we thought we would get, but obviously what we got was a lot more than I ever dreamed it would.
Right.
A baseball bat from the 19 teens
Right.
would be worth. And but we had some bad situations with the auction company. They didn't want to pay us everything that they were supposed to. Not in comparison to what it brought in, it was not a smaller amount of money, but we had a hard time getting that. And one of the guys that they had to call me and talk to me about that was a minority owner of the Yankees, who at one time had one of the largest memorabilia collections in the world.
Mm-hmm.
He told me, he said, basically, he said, it's your decision. He said, I'm not here to try to talk you into it. He said, I just want to let you know. He said, I learned a long time ago that you can't be too attached to stuff. And if you feel like you want to sell it, you need to go ahead and sell it.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, after all the other discussions with other people, we decided to do it, and we went through with it. And then we got this problem at the end. So I called this guy back. And I told him, I said, listen, I said, I'm not here asking you for anything. I just want you to know what's going on. They're using your name to talk to me about selling Joe's bat.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're doing this, this, and this, which to me is a knock on your name.
Right.
Because you're standing up for them.
Right.
And I said, again, now, I'm not asking you for anything. I'm wanting you to know.
Right.
And he said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. Because one of the things they promised us was that once we sold it, they would either get us tickets to a World Series game with the Yankees or a weekend series. I did tell him that.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me, he said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. This was on a Tuesday night. He said, if you can get here by the weekend, I host the burn unit from one of the hospitals
Mm-hmm.
every year in a suite. And we come in, we watch Ballgame, we eat, and said it'll be all the food you want to have. He said we have a good time. He said we just enjoy each other and have a relaxed evening together. And he said, if y'all can get here, you got tickets. And so I get off the phone. Now, I've been a Yankee fan since I was old enough to know what baseball was.
Mm-hmm.
My wife is 9 years younger than I am, but she's a bigger Yankee fan than I am,
Wow.
her whole family.
Mm-hmm.
And I got off the phone at about 8:30, and I told her what he said, and she didn't even say what. She just picked up the phone, and she started getting phone numbers for airline reservations and hotel reservations. And
She's like, I already have my bags packed.
yeah, we're ready to go. And so she got us an airline reservation. She got us a place to stay. And amazingly, her brother and one of his friends and his son had been planning a trip to New York for a year.
Mm-hmm.
It ended up being the same weekend. We ended up being on the same flight.
Whoa.
We ended up being in the same hotel.
Unbelievable.
Now, picture that.
Right.
A lint head from Camperdown Mill Community and rednecks from Blue Ridge coming together like that in New York City with no pre-planning.
Yeah.
But we went to the ball game and just had a great time. I asked him the next day, I said, because they were playing Boston, I said, could you get us some tickets for tomorrow? I said, I'll pay for them. I want to pay for them. He said, no. He said, you just come to such and such a gate back down here and we'll have tickets. We were like 3 rows from the front right behind home plate.
Awesome.
And So we flew out on Sunday, and that was right before 9/11.
Oh, wow.
The weekend before 9/11. And I kick myself now because after the Saturday afternoon game, it was a Saturday afternoon game, we chose to go out to eat at one of the big steakhouses. My brother-in-law's friend and his son went to the Twin Towers.
Wow.
And saw it. We didn't get to see the Twin Towers. And I hate that now. But
Yeah.
kind of ironic how that happened and how that worked out.
When you did own Black Betsy, did lots of people know that you had it, or was that something that you like just showed off to friends and family, like close friends and family? Was that information you kept to yourself? How many people knew what you had?
I had high school friends that came and spent, and even friends that I grew up with in the neighborhood would come and spend the night, and they would see the bat there, and they may make a remark about it, and I may tell them what it was, and it was just kind of in passing. We never discussed it. We never talked about a whole lot about Joe. I mean, it was just basically my family that knew the importance of what that bat meant to us as a family because of our relationship with Joe and his family and Katie.
Right.
But other than that, no. Like I said, whenever I got it and I put it in our den at home, and it stayed there until my dad died in '79. It only went out of the house one time, and that was to the museum. And I never really talked to anybody about it. But there again, it had meaning to me.
Right. You didn't know it was something worth talking about.
Right, because it was Joe's.
Right.
But I'm thinking, well, that don't mean a whole lot to anybody else.
Yeah.
That's important to me and my family,
Right.
but not to anybody else. So we just never talked about it.
Yeah, interesting.
And it's kind of amazing now because I've had people come up after that and say, well, I saw that bat in your house, but I never knew what it was. And I said, well, not many people did.
Right, yeah. I did.
Yeah, I did. I knew what it meant to me and my family anyway.
Yeah. You decided to sell it through an eBay auction, right?
Yes.
Walk me through that decision process, because eBay is synonymous with auctions today, but back then it wasn't this huge, behemoth auction house, especially not for something of that nature. Why did you decide to go with eBay instead of another like Sotheby's or a huge auction house? And how did they court you?
Well, it actually wasn't eBay. We went through another company out in California.
Oh, okay.
That's the gentleman the one that approached me about it. That's who he had talked with, and that the representative from their company came here to talk to me.
Gotcha.
So it was through that company, but they chose eBay. The process was very simple. I mean, they set it all up. We determined a figure that we were going to ask for, which, I know hindsight's 20/20, but I wish I'd asked for more up front but they said no, you won't ever get more than this. Well, I'd love to have found out.
Right.
But again, hindsight's 20/20. I'm not begrudging anything.
Right.
I'm blessed and thankful for what we got.
Of course.
And it has opened up a lot of doors for us and our family to be able to do some things that we would have never been able to do. But it was a pretty simple process, really. Once we got all the paperwork done and got the promotions out, it was just a matter of setting a date and going through with it.
And there were baseball cards that were produced to publicize it. Like, how did all of that make you feel? Did it seem goofy, or was it like this is kind of cool? Yeah,
I know, it was kind of cool. Yeah, it was really kind of cool. It was really just kind of amazing, and all those types of things that just kind of fell into place. That, of course, if we were doing it, if we were putting on the auction, we'd have never thought about doing something like that. But the marketing geniuses that they are and were, they knew exactly what they needed to do.
Yeah,
and they knew the right people to contact to stir interest beforehand and try to get the buzz going so they could get the interest going and get the price up.
Yeah, you always used to tell Charlie Forrester, your friend and assistant baseball coach, the bat will never leave me unless I donate it to the Hall of Fame when Joe Jackson goes in. Did you think that maybe selling it would create some publicity and some stir to get that ball rolling again and maybe get Joe's name cleared, or was it? Walk me through that thought process a little bit.
I don't think I really thought of it that way. It was just a matter of an opportunity that would benefit my family. Obviously, anything we did back in those days and now that we do or do now that has to do with Joe, that's the goal. That's the end goal,
of course,
to try to help Joe clear his name and just keep him out in the public eye. We've been fortunate to be able to have a little bit of a part in that. And, we've been able to instigate a couple of times where we got some legislation passed here in South Carolina and in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Thompson put my name and address in the book. That was all just kind of neat to begin with. And then all of a sudden I started getting letters and more letters. And I've got a stack of letters in that closet right over there that's probably 1.5 feet high from school kids.
Wow.
That their teachers would read that book to them or have them read it and then have them write letters making their case for Joe going to the Hall of Fame.
Cool.
And some of them are doozies. They're really neat. And of course, I ended up copying off a couple of pictures of Joe and some information sheets and highlights of his career and all. And I always send that back to them and to give them something back and show them how much I appreciate them doing that. I really honestly would like one day to be able to take those things and put them in a book. Probably wouldn't be a big seller, but the people that would take the time to read some of those letters would get a big kick out of it. But no, everything that we've done has been to promote Joe. And I feel strongly with that from the first time. And I really realized, I guess maybe the first time was whenever we went to see The Field of Dreams at the theater when it first came out. We'd gone out to eat, and I was getting perturbed because it was taking too long for us to eat. And we were going to be running a little late. And I said, we need to get there so we can get a good seat. And so we walk in probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes before the show was supposed to start. And we end up on about the 4th or 5th row. And all the way across in front of us is a row of kids that look like they may be 6 or 7 or 8 years old. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to be able to enjoy this, But when that movie started, those kids sat still and stayed quiet and were glued to the screen just like I was. Yeah. And I thought to myself, well, now, if it can quieten down that age group in a group situation where normally they're going to be chatting the whole time, then there's something to this. And we got some people we can reach. And it's always, my wife and I have always got kicks out of the letters from the schools, from the kids. And it's been something we've always looked forward to, to get those and be able to respond to them.
At different points in this conversation, you've said that you wish that bat was still sitting right over there. But you've also said that selling it allowed you to do things that you never had dreamed of. You put 2 kids through school and you've gone on trips and done things. Knowing today everything that you know about what happened and what went down and how everything was handled, if you could go back, what would you do? Would you sell it again or would you keep it?
One part of me says I would sell it. One part of me says I wouldn't. If I had to give you one final answer, I would probably say I would keep it.
Yeah.
If I had any kind of an idea where this journey was going to take us to where we are now with the museum and with the efforts that we've got people like you and other folks that are part of the museum and that support Joe, if I knew we were going to get to a point like that or like this, then I would probably keep it because I would think it would be something that we could use to help get the word out even more and even stronger than we can now. So I don't, I guess I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I don't regret selling it because of what you just said. But again, it would be nice to still have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't guess you can have it both ways, can you?
No, this is such a unique situation. So few people are gifted a valuable piece like this that can change their life.
Well, basically, you're gifted a piece of wood that's shaped into a baseball bat that you think is just a piece of wood that is a baseball bat.
Right.
And then over a period of time, you come to realize, well, this thing's pretty valuable.
Right. When somebody approaches you and says it's worth a number that has a comma in it.
Yeah.
It's no longer just a piece of wood.
Right. And then people start asking you, said, well, did you just have that in your house all the time? I said I told them it was in my dad's house, and they said, well, did you, and even whenever we had it here before we sold it, they said, you kept it there? And I said, well, yeah, we have insurance and we have a security system. And they said, well, don't you know that doesn't really matter? But I wasn't going to put it in a safe deposit box.
Right.
I wanted to
enjoy it.
When I'm working here at my desk, I always enjoyed looking right across the room right there, and it was sitting right there. And so that we never had a problem with it, and I never was going to worry about that.
Right. Yeah, it seemed to have worked out for you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
With the boom in the collecting market over the past couple decades, especially with high-end and game-used memorabilia, are you surprised that Black Betsy hasn't publicly sold multiple times since your sale in 2001?
I'm surprised, but I know that it's the gentleman that bought it has at least tried to sell it once. And he may have sold it, and the other guy may have tried to sell it. I don't keep up with that. The only way I keep up with that is through Mike Nola. And he kind of keeps me posted to what's going on. But I know that I'm assuming it's the guy that bought it from me. He's tried to sell it 2 times. And he really upped the price a good bit. And so why there were no takers, I don't know. I mean, it's just maybe it's one of those things where it was a kind of like a one-hit wonder, and there's just no interest for us to spend that kind of money for it. You know, it's hard to say.
Yeah, it's also surprising that you guys don't keep in touch. There's so few people in the history of the planet who have owned that bat.
Well, see, I don't know him, and I've never met him. I never talked with him.
Right.
When the bat sold, I didn't even find out who bought it.
Right.
I found out about that later on.
Yeah.
And
but
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
I think if I were him, I would reach out to you because obviously your name is out there. All you have to do is Google search original Black Betsy owner. And after Joe Jackson's name pops up, yours does.
Right.
So I think I would reach out and be like, hey, let's talk about Black Betsy a little bit and tell me everything you know about it. Tell me the story.
How'd you come about getting it?
Right.
And, the whole history of it. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree, but I don't know. I can't speak for him, but he might. It may have just been an investment for him. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's just not working out as far as him being able to get it sold. Of course, it's just like anything else, and what we've always heard all our lives. Anything you're trying to sell is worth any amount of money if you can find somebody to buy it.
Right.
And
if you're not willing to sell, it's worth nothing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so if he's throwing it out there for $750,000 or $1 million, and he can't find that one right person somewhere in the world, then he's not going to be able to sell it.
Right.
So.
Right. You used to also have 2 original legal documents signed by Joe. Which documents were those, and how did you get those?
The 2 behind you on the wall. That's the situation where I talked with a gentleman from the mortuary that was executor after receiving a call from Ray Allen about wanting to do something for Joe and try to get his name cleared. We decided to try to get the new baseball stadium that they just happened to be building at that time, minor league park, named after Joe. And so I told him, I said, well, I know the guy that was the executor of Katie's estate because he brought me the bat, but I also go to church with him. And I said, let me call him and just see if he knows anybody that we can talk to or anybody that may have something. So I called him and told him what we were doing, and he said, well, Lester, he said, I'll be honest with you. He said, I've got a box in my attic. And he said, I told the family when we closed out the estate and we're closing out the house, I said, you take everything out of the house you want. I don't want anything. It's not for me to have. He said, you take everything you want. And he said, they did, and they left and told me they were through. He said, so I was checking around behind them, and I found a box just right in the attic, just right there at the opening. I mean, it wasn't pushed way back in the corner. It was just right there. And he said, I took it down. And he said, I really just have kind of glanced through it a little bit. I hadn't looked at it closely. He said, but you can have it if you want it. I said, well, sure, I'd be happy to look through it and just see what's there.
Right.
And so, as I mentioned to you a little bit earlier, he brought it to me one Wednesday night after church and got it to my house about 8:30, and I started going through it, and I think I went to bed about 2 or 2:30 the next morning. There were a lot of legal documents. There were a lot of business ledgers from Joe's businesses. There was an address book that they kept, address and phone number book that they kept that had our family's name in it and phone number.
Cool.
And Christmas cards and get well cards that our family and some of our aunts and uncles had sent to them, one that even I had written out in my own handwriting. It had a lot of things in there like that, and just amazing stuff. Some of it was worth a little bit because I sold a few pieces of it at another auction, but most of it would be something that might not be of any type of monetary value to a lot of people, but it's something that meant a lot to me.
Right, and that sentimental value to open that box and see a card that you wrote.
Yeah.
And to know that Joe and Katie held that card in their hands.
They absolutely kept it. Yeah, it meant something to them.
Yeah. You used to have some original documents that belonged to Joe and that were signed by Joe. One of them was the bill of sale to the pool hall and cigar store that Joe owned in Chicago. He sold it to his friend and teammate Lefty Williams after the Black Sox scandal, and just wanted to get out of Chicago. And he sold it to him for $1 just to wipe his hands clean and be able to get out of there.
Yeah.
What does having that document mean to you, and how interesting was it to have that piece of history?
Well, it was interesting more so than just having Joe's and Lefty Williams' autograph on it.
Yeah.
But it's just, it was a piece of his history and
Right.
his mindset of what you just said. He was willing to sell it for $1 just because he had to do that to make it a legal transaction. And he was wanting to get rid of it, and Lefty wanted it, and they were good friends, so they were able to work out a deal like that. It was kind of unique when I first saw it that he sold it for $1.
Right.
But then I realized, what you talked about a few minutes ago, he was ready to, clear his hands with it and move on.
And I think Lefty was kind of down on his luck a little bit at that point because he didn't have a business career to fall back on. He was a baseball player who now couldn't play baseball.
Right.
So I think it was also kind of a favor to his friend to be like, you know what, here's a successful business. You can just take it and run with it.
Yeah. Again, going back to what we said earlier, that's the kind of guy that Joe was.
Right. Do you still have any other personal mementos from either Joe or Katie now that you no longer have Black Betsy and sold some of the documents that you had? I mean, obviously you've got some of the cards and greeting cards and things like that, but any other items that they owned?
Well, there's two. I got Joe's Bible, little New Testament.
Cool.
I also have Joe's rabbit's foot that was in the box.
So Joe was kind of a superstitious person.
Yeah.
Do you know what other superstitions he had? Because I know he would always, anytime he would find a hairpin on the ground, he would pick it up and put it in his back pocket.
I heard that, yeah.
And he would just keep adding and adding to the back pocket of his baseball pants. And when he would go into a batting slump, he would empty the pocket and then start over. So I know that he has some sort of superstitions with some of those things. So the rabbit's foot is another cool piece of the story.
Yeah, it's kind of neat to be able to find that in there. But two of the things that I got, one was a telegram that Joe actually sent to Katie. Mm-hmm. He was getting ready to wanting to come home, and didn't have the money, and he wired her and said, please, some form or fashion, he made the comment and said, please wire $50 ASAP so I can get home. And that telegram's on the wall over there, and it's a neat piece of history.
Yeah, from December of 1915, and the address I noticed was their house on Lexington Avenue in Cleveland, which was just a block down the street from League Park where the Indians played.
Right.
It was mostly the Naps while Joe was there, but in 1915 they changed the name to the Indians. So 1915, Joe got traded to the Chicago White Sox 83 games into the season. So the fact that he had sent that telegram and Katie was still living in that house, that the timeline was really interesting to me on being able to see that Joe was in Chicago most likely, and since this is December, it's possible that he was in Greenville. Who knows? I'm curious to know more about that and maybe look into what the real story is and why Katie was in one place and he was in another, because in December you would think they should be together. Right. The
Absolutely.
Season's not happening.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm very intrigued by that piece.
There are two other pieces over there that actually belong to Katie. They're pass books for the World Series.
Yeah.
2 World Series. There's several unused tickets still in there that she didn't go. I can imagine.
Yeah.
But that was a neat surprise to see those. You're talking about 100 years old there. Just those two documents and pass books, and it's really kind of neat.
It's so incredible.
Yeah.
Joe said that the trophy he won for the longest throw contest at the Tim Murnane benefit game in 1917 was one of his most prized possessions. I know that you were maybe a little young to have heard the story straight from Joe, but did anyone ever tell you about that contest and what it meant to Joe to win it?
No, I remember seeing the trophy on his mantle at his house. May not even have known what the trophy was for. Mm-hmm. I just saw the trophy and the clock. Maybe it's the clock that he was given
in 1951 by the Cleveland Indians.
By the Indians, yeah. And but other things like that were on his mantle that he had there in the home. But no, I never heard any details about that, and I'm assuming that it was something he was proud of.
Right.
I mean, certainly he should have been for the accomplishment that he made that day.
Yeah. I have a Polaroid from the Jackson family scrapbook of the corner of the mantle that has the clock on it. So is that, you said that that's where he also kept the trophy, on that same mantle?
I thought it was on the mound. I thought that's where he had most of his trophies.
Cool.
He didn't have a lot of trophies in his memorabilia room or his office. They were all out in the living room. And so I'm thinking that's where it was.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because as we try to recreate, what the house was like in certain areas, obviously we're not going to do it in the bedrooms where we're doing, pictures on the walls and
Right.
stuff like that. But in the kitchen, we're trying to make it as accurate as possible. And obviously with the living room, if we can find a clock that looks like that clock or do certain things, like the fireplace and the mantle are still the actual one.
Right.
So if we can make something look the way it looked, we're going to try and do that.
Absolutely.
So it's nice to know these details.
Yeah.
You started the Shoeless Joe Jackson Historical Society with a man named Ray Allen, who you've brought up. He was from New Jersey.
Right.
The society's efforts spawned resolutions from Congress in support of Joe, led by Senator Strom Thurmond and Representative Jim DeMint. And that led to the creation of petitions to Major League Baseball from Hall of Famers Ted Williams and Bob Feller. You felt strongly enough about Joe to lead a campaign in 1983 to put Jackson's name on a 7,000-seat ballpark going up in the southeast end of Greenville. And you got thousands of petition signatures, but the mayor and the city council decided to call it Greenville Municipal Stadium instead. How did you start the Shoeless Joe Jackson Historical Society, and what was its initial purpose?
The initial purpose was to get the stadium name for Joe. And basically we came up with a society just to give us a name to be recognized.
To make it sound a little bit more official?
A little bit more official,
Yeah.
a little bit more important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because I don't think fan club has quite the same cachet.
No, not at all. But we decided to do that, and when people would contact us, we would just write down their name and put it on a list. And I've still got a list in there now that I started making 20 years ago or longer. And gosh, I guess it's been 30 or 40 years now. Yeah, that's basically the main reason. We just wanted to have something where we could be recognized. Yeah. And the thing with the stadium, we really put together a pretty good presentation. I thought we had I don't know exactly how many signatures. We had a ton, and I got a bunch of the kids at Carolina High School and the teachers even to go out on a Saturday to the malls and different businesses and get signatures. And I went to McAllister Square, and Joe's sister showed up, and I don't even know who brought her there, but she showed up and sat with us for about an hour and a half. And of course, I always loved to be around her because up until the very end, her mind was as sharp as a tack, and she had a good sense of humor, and she was really a fun person to be around. But Ray Allen actually drove down here the day we were going to the council meeting, and we went and made our presentation, and we actually had some folks. I think we had them pretty much swayed in our direction. Of course, there were 2 or 3 or 4 other groups there that were trying to get this name for their parent or grandparent or a relative or something like that. Several of them were like textile ball players, and one of them was a guy that actually owned the baseball stadium, Meadowbrook Park. Whenever I was in high school, that's where we played our high school games and played our Legion games. And he was the one that owned the park and actually brought minor league baseball back to Greenville and kept it here for so many years. Cool. When Nolan Ryan and a bunch of those guys came through here. But and I really thought he was deserving. And as a matter of fact, whenever they kind of dismissed us and we went back out in the hallway or the lobby area, I had known the two, I call them kids because they're my age, and I'd gone to school with them and knew them for a while. Right. We sat down and talked, and we came out to an agreement. If we need to, we'll ask them to name the stadium for one and the field for the other. There you go. And we got both of them involved, but when they came back with their decision, there was no need to even talk to him about it because it was just clear cut. Right. He didn't want to hurt, and this was mentioned. He didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and it wasn't a situation about Joe's name with him being banned, like it might have happened with the Drive whenever they tried to do something there at that stadium. Major League Baseball kind of stepped in on that, but it wasn't a situation there. This was something that was just totally a decision by the mayor, and I think more so than the council.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I can understand that.
You said that Ted Williams was the society's cleanup hitter and that his involvement is the biggest opportunity we've had to get something done. How important was Ted's involvement to Shoeless Joe's legacy, and how did Ted's passing affect your efforts to clear Joe's name?
Anytime anybody asks me about that, my first response is very simple. As far as Major League Baseball is concerned, when Ted opened his mouth and spoke, people listened. When he got on board with the Joe Jackson efforts, I thought, well, this is our chance.
Mm-hmm.
This is our opportunity to really make some noise and get some people to listen and get this thing done. And we had an event here in Greenville one night, Joe Jackson night. Tommy Lasorda was the master of ceremonies. Ted was supposed to come, but he wasn't feeling real well. He came through on a live stream video type thing and spoke to it for a few minutes. But I really think he believed, as he said a lot of times, that Joe was one of the greatest hitters ever. And I really truly believe that he felt that Joe deserved his shot at the Hall of Fame. As a matter of fact, I mentioned earlier about responding to the kids, the school kids that write about Joe and send us letters. One of the things that I put in there is a full-page statement by Ted in a plea to Major League Baseball to right a wrong and put Joe Jackson in the Hall of Fame. It was sad that he passed away as early as he did in this process,
Right.
because it really did feel like whenever he was alive and he was speaking out about it, that we had a lot more of the attention of Major League Baseball and the people that could make those kind of decisions.
He was kind of famous for speaking out about things that he thought needed to be changed. During his own Hall of Fame induction speech, he talked about how Negro League players deserve to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So, like you said, when he talked, people listened. And I don't know if there's a player today or a former player who has that same kind of grasp. When he says something, Major League Baseball listens. Do you think there's anybody today that is respected that way? Who often speaks up? Because like Hank Aaron and Willie Mays, they're obviously incredibly respected, but they so infrequently speak out and do things like that.
Yeah, they're more on the quiet side.
Yeah.
And not bashful, not shy, but they're just they have a quieter personality.
Right.
And Ted obviously didn't have that. He didn't have it when he was playing. I'm not sure there is one out there nowadays that, and we both know, and people that follow the game know, it is a totally different game nowadays, and there's no loyalty for the players to the team,
And vice versa.
And in most cases, there's no loyalty from the players to the fans.
Right.
There are some, and those to me are the ones that are more respected than the others. But there's not those kind of people that have that kind of stature in the game
Right.
that are willing to speak out on something like that.
Yeah. Ted once said about Joe's situation, "I love this game more than anything that ever happened to me. It's hard for me to believe that baseball wouldn't be fair." Do you think baseball's been fair to Joe Jackson?
No, I don't think it was fair from the get-go. I think that he and the other 7 were used as scapegoats. They were used to make an example out of. And I think that's exactly why they hired Kennesaw Mountain Landis to do that. And he did what they wanted him to do. Having said that, and that being done, I think it was wrong because obviously they went to court twice and he was found innocent twice. So if that happened today, whoever that was would probably own Major League Baseball because they would sue and they would win. Right. Having gone through that and been through that situation and putting that behind us and carrying it on down the road to 1951, the statement that was made by Kennesaw Mountain Landis and baseball was that Joe was going to be kicked out of baseball for life, not in perpetuity,
Right.
for life. Joe's life ended on December the 5th, 1951. From that time on, he should have been eligible for the Hall of Fame.
I agree.
Whether they elected him to the Hall of Fame, that's a totally different story, but he should have been eligible. I think that's even a bigger travesty and a bigger sin for Major League Baseball than the initial situation of kicking him out of baseball.
Yeah, I agree. And that has always been the way that I would approach it, is forget whether he was guilty or not. Let's concede that he was. Who cares?
Right.
His life ended.
Yeah.
So if he's banned for life, the ban is over.
Yeah.
So, again, we're not saying you have to vote him into the Hall of Fame, but put him on the ballot.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely, and it's not.
he served his time.
And it's absolutely, and it's not like he was a mediocre player
Right.
that's trying to get something he didn't deserve.
Right.
I mean, he was obviously, by the account of several star Major League Baseball players, one of the greatest, if not the greatest hitter, one of the greatest hitters ever in the game.
Yeah, you've got guys like Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb and Walter Johnson and Tris Speaker and Ted Williams saying that this is the greatest natural hitter who ever walked the planet.
Yeah.
You can't get higher praise than that.
And how can you ignore that?
Right.
And how would you not want him to be in the Hall of Fame?
Right.
Even if you put an asterisk beside his name
Mm-hmm.
and say, well, this is what happened to him
Mm-hmm.
at the end of his career. But he still deserves to be there because the stats prove that.
Right. Yeah. I've never had a problem with having the plaques be truthful. If you want to put somebody in and like Barry Bonds and say he was alleged to have participated in steroids and a part of that era, but he still hit more home runs than anybody who's ever put a uniform on. So asterisk or not, you can still tell the story and still honor him in the same way, because it's not like Major League Baseball didn't know that players were taking steroids.
Oh, yeah.
I
know. Yeah, you could tell.
Right.
The common man could look at them and tell.
Right.
Just from their appearance.
Yeah.
But it's like, the stats. I've coached high school baseball and 8 years of American Legion baseball, a total of probably 32 years, played all through high school and college. And, a lot of people say stats are for losers and that type of thing, but stats tell you the story.
Right.
If you had a good game, you had pretty good stats. I mean, you may have gone 2 for 3 or 3 for 4. You may have hit a home run or drove in 4 or 5 runs. If you were a pitcher, you may have pitched a shutout or a 1 or 2 hitter. But over a career, you have the lofty batting average and other statistics and other things to go along with it. And Joe had the statistics to prove just what stature he had as a Major League Baseball player.
Right.
And it's just sad that Major League Baseball doesn't want to acknowledge that and add him to the group of the best.
Right. No, I totally feel the same way. What do you think really happened with the money from the gamblers that Joe ended up with? There's some people who think that Katie donated it to a children's hospital. Some people think that they used it to pay off Joe's sister's medical bills. What do you think happened? Because he did end up with money that came from gamblers.
Well, obviously, we don't know for sure because we weren't there.
Right.
But and everything I've heard is partly what you just said. Going back to what I said at the very beginning about Katie scaring me, I'm sure that once Katie found out about it, that she just probably flat told Joe, said, we're not keeping that money. We're going to have to do something with it. Whether they donated it to charity, which I'm sure she would be okay with that, or used it to pay off the medical bills, I'm sure she'd be okay with that. But the only thing that I feel confident about, totally confident about, is that they didn't keep it. And because I'm sure she would not, and I don't think he would have wanted to keep it, but I think she was the reinforcement on that, saying we're not going to keep this money.
Well, he definitely didn't want to keep it because as soon as he was handed it, he tried to give it back.
So
it's interesting to me to ask different people what they think happened, because nobody's ever going to know for sure.
Right.
But I think where you fall on that spectrum kind of tips your hand of what type of person you think Joe was, and everybody seems to agree that he did something with it. He made good use of it for somebody else.
Right. Yeah.
And that's interesting to me. How would you like to see Joe Jackson remembered?
Well, obviously he was a Major League Baseball player, so first and foremost, I guess I wanted him to get his recognition and just how great a baseball player he was. But having been privileged to know him for a short period of time personally, and then learning more and more about him as I've grown older, I want him to be remembered as the gentleman that he was, and as the, I guess you could say, community leader, the friend that he was to the people that stood up for him. I understand that he was a very loyal person, and if people were his friends, they had a friend for life.
Yeah.
And he didn't turn his back on people like that. I want people to realize that he was more than a baseball player. He was a gentleman, and he was a gentle man.
Right.
That's what I'm really trying to say, because I've never heard any situations where there was fighting and problems like that. I know there was certain times whenever there was probably mouthing back and forth, which is typical of any level of baseball or any sports. But I don't think he was what you would call maybe a rebel or renegade on the field. I think he played the game showing that he respected the game.
Yeah.
And that goes to the quality of a person that he was, and that would be important to me, that for him to be remembered that way.
When you said that he was a loyal person, that he never turned his back on anybody, do you think he was always that way? Was that his upbringing, or do you think after what baseball did to him and his friends and teammates and the sport itself turned their back on him, he made it his mission to never make anybody else feel the way that he had been made to feel?
It could have been, or it may have been a situation where he was always like that, and then that situation you just mentioned reinforced that, and made him feel that way even more so. And so he wanted to make sure he followed through on that, and didn't cause anybody to have those kind of feelings.
Yeah, interesting. What do you remember about the ceremony for the dedication of Shoeless Joe Jackson Memorial Park in Greenville?
There was a good crowd that showed up, and it was a nice ceremony. I don't remember a whole lot about it as far as the speakers or anything like that.
It was at Brandon Mill, right? And that's the field that Joe played on when he played for Brandon Mill.
Yep.
When the Brandon Mill team used to play at that field, the field itself was flipped,
Turned
the orientation.
Yes.
So do you know how that decision was made to flip it to its orientation currently, or when that happened?
I know, like the second or third year I came back to Carolina to coach. I was coaching football, basketball, and baseball, and like all young coaches do. And we were getting ready to have our first son, and the football coach came to me and he asked me, he said, "You want to take football season off? Because we
got a lot going on."
Actually, we had our son that previous spring.
Wow.
The first spring I was there during the playoffs, baseball playoffs, and so he asked me, said, "You want to just take football off this year, and you can be at home or do whatever you want to do." Well, I probably made him mad because I told him and I appreciated that, and I was able to spend more time at home, but I decided I was going to have fall baseball practice. But unfortunately, I only had like 3 or 4 guys that didn't play something else, and but 2 of them were seniors that had never played baseball before. So they told me
a lot of work to do.
They told me, they said, let's now they played basketball, good basketball players, and they said let's take some time and work out a little bit, 2 or 3 days a week. And we couldn't find any place to play because they used our baseball field for football practice.
Right.
So how we ended up at Brandon, I don't know, but we did. And at that time, the field was the other way. And, of course, we just barely had an infield that we could see, and the grass in the outfield was probably 2 feet high. So we couldn't do it. They hit a little bit and got to field some ground balls and stuff. But we did go there. But I do remember the field was facing the other direction.
Yeah. And
but now, why they decided to change that, I don't know. And how many years after that did it happen, I don't know. But we've actually, whenever I coached Legion ball, a year or so in there, whenever we went to Iowa for the Field of Dreams tournament, we hosted a preseason American Legion tournament that we played there.
Cool.
And had about 5 or 6 teams come in, and it was kind of neat, you know, and got some of the old time Textile players to come out and throw out the first pitch, and it was really a unique experience. But I'm glad they saved that field, and they at one time had a lot bigger plans for it as far as what they were going to do around the field and things like that, and I hope that one day that'll come to be. And that field will be there for a long time. It's getting some good use, from what I understand. Yeah,
that's we play our vintage games at that field every year, and that's something that I want to do in Greenville also is some of these old Textile League parks and fields are still around. Whether they're currently baseball fields or just plots of land.
Right.
So that's one of the things I want to do at the museum is renovate those fields and make them baseball fields again that are usable for the community, whether they're official Little League games or not, just a sandlot that a local kid can go play on.
Sure.
I think it'd be cool to make those spots usable again and to put plaques up that say, hey, Joe Jackson played on this field.
Yeah.
Or whoever it was, even whether it's Joe or not, the fact that there is history here and nobody knows it. So we've got to preserve that kind of stuff and let people know that you live in a neighborhood where some pretty cool stuff happened.
Yeah,
I think,
and you could include that on the plaque.
Right.
And it not only would give the community a place to play ball, it would also help keep the textile memories alive.
Absolutely.
And that's deserving, because when I was growing up, textiles was the big thing in the upstate.
Right.
And we were the textile center of the South, and they'd have a textile show here, at the old, what they call the old textile hall.
Right.
That I only went once or twice, and of course I had no idea what was going on because I mean they brought big looms and big pieces of machinery. They hauled them in here from all over the world and set them up for a week or 2 weeks, and it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And textiles was the lifeblood of this community for a long time.
Yeah, and I believe Woodside Mill was the largest mill under one roof in the world for a number of years.
For a number of years, yeah. It sure was.
What do you remember about the ceremony for the opening of the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum?
It was a very nice ceremony. I can't picture how large the crowd was, but it seems to me that I think back and thinking that there probably should have been more people there. Of course, I would have thought the whole city of Greenville should have been there.
Right.
But no, it was good. It was nice, and it was good to be able to go back in Joe's house again.
Yeah. What did that feel like?
It was kind of eerie, I'm thinking, I'll take it back a step further than that. When they had the ceremony to announce that they were going to be moving the house downtown, I was standing outside the front gate and facing the front porch, and I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, how many years has it been since I walked through those doors? Because that was the first time I'd been back. I had ridden by there a few times just to see.
50 years, right?
Yeah. But I thought, well, what's it going to feel like when I do walk through those doors?
Yeah.
And, of course, I couldn't wait to get in there. And it was kind of a flood of emotions. Of course, the front yard was a big part of it for me, too, because that's where Joe and Dad always sat.
Right.
But it was neat just to walk from room to room, and then I get back in there and I see that opening to the attic, and I'm thinking, well, I got a story about that hole in the attic right there. But it was nice. It was neat.
Do you have any pictures of Joe and your dad together?
No, unfortunately not.
Yeah, that's a
I
shame.
wish I did. Yeah. I'd love to have a picture of him, the two of them together, and Mother and Katie together too.
Yeah.
But no, we just. My sister was 5 years older than I am, but she passed away 3 or 4 years ago. But I don't remember her going with us. For some reason, and she may have been there, but I just, not that I didn't.
Not in your memory, she wasn't.
Not that I didn't like my sister, but not in my memory, she wasn't. But she would have probably been the one to take the pictures. And
that makes sense.
And again, we were just visiting a relative,
right? Yeah,
and
you don't even
didn't even think about
stuff.
that. Yeah,
right.
And that's something that I'll look back on and wish we'd had a little bit more insight to do.
Yeah,
take a bunch of pictures.
Do you have any pictures or recollections of specific things in the Jackson's old house that is now the museum? Like, do you remember paint colors or furniture placement or anything like that? So if we are trying to recreate a specific room or anything like that we can kind of use that to go off of?
I can kind of picture his office. That's very simple, It was just a desk on the left and then some bookshelves, kind of like it is now.
Okay, good.
And I can kind of see, of course, I've seen pictures of this through the years, too, of the living room, where it seemed like there was one chair sitting right there, kind of to the right of the fireplace, and the couch was against the far wall across from that. If I remember, there's the only full wall in there,
right?
I think, because there was windows in the front wall.
Right.
But in colors, I have no clue.
That's
I don't
okay.
remember anything about that. But no, that's not something I paid a lot of attention to.
And even if you did, I mean, you were 5 years old.
Yeah.
So I get it. But as long as I've got you, I've got to ask.
Oh, that's fine. I don't mind.
Is there anything on the horizon in your personal life or professional life that you're excited about?
Just surviving another day.
Yeah.
I'm happy doing what I'm doing. On one hand, I'd love to be totally retired, but on the other hand, I feel like as long as I can go, and these guys will put up with me, and they'll let me work for 3 or 4 hours a day, or 2 or 3 hours a day, whatever, or maybe 5 or 6, depending on what it works out. Gives me something to do, gets me out of the house in the morning, keeps me on some type of routine.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm out there, building houses or something like that. It's just, we're trying to sell some signs and have a good time in the meantime. But other than that, we just we try our best to keep up with our grandkids. We've got 4 sons. We've got 8 grandkids and 1 great-grand. One of the grandsons is starting to play golf and is going to be trying to play golf in high school.
Cool.
The other one plays baseball for my son at Eastside. And then the other 2 grandsons are just young. The one just started K-5 this year, and the other one's like 2 or 3 years old. We got granddaughters that play softball. So we got enough to keep especially our springs busy.
So now it's your leg that kids are sliding into, pretending it's third base.
Yeah, or beat me up when we try to play basketball outside on the basketball court. They get a kick out of that. But we just try to enjoy our family as much as we possibly can. And, we got about 18 or 19 total in the family, so it's always a fun time to get them together and spend some time together.
It's a big group.
Yeah.
Is the Shoeless Joe Jackson Historical Society still a thing that you run? I mean, I know that you said that you still have your list of all the people. Is that an ongoing project, or is that over?
Well, it's not over, but it's not something we publicize or basically the only type of recognition we get is from Joe Thompson's book, and the only time we hear from anybody is from the school kids.
Yeah.
And so that's basically the only time it comes up.
So how can people reach out to you and find out about the society if they want to?
They can write me here at my address here at home. They can send me an email. I will send them a letter thanking them for contacting me and send them some information also.
So do you want to put your email address out there for people if they want to send you something, or do you want to keep that private?
I have no problem with that.
Okay.
It's my name in reverse, Erwin Lester @hotmail.com.
Great. Okay. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think we should get to?
The only thing we didn't talk about is the dedication of the statue downtown.
Yeah.
And that was an exciting day, obviously, because of the statue, but we did have a large crowd for that.
Right.
And a lot of folks that I hadn't seen in a long time. My high school baseball coach showed up, and which kind of surprised me. Shouldn't have. I mean, was a sports geek like the rest of us, but I just wasn't expecting him to be there, and then some other folks like that. But it's this whole process for the last 40 some odd years has. Since we started the society and since we started the efforts to try to get Joe's name cleared, has brought me into contact with a lot of great people. Yeah. And people that I probably never would have met, and even if I'd met them, it might have just been a handshake and hello and go on. But have been able to sit down and talk with them about Joe and about other things, and it's been a great journey. Just we're really hoping that the outcome is going to be what we want it to be.
One day.
We're excited about the museum.
Yeah.
The museum has been a sleeping giant, and from the get-go, it was worth people coming to see.
Right.
But there just never was that much opportunity for people to come and see it. I've always felt like, if no other times, the museum ought to be open every time the drive play at home, at least for a couple hours before the game. And because there's going to be a few people, if not more, that's going to want to just walk through the museum while they're downtown at the stadium.
Right.
It needs to have the accessibility for people to be able to see. And, you have people come in from out of town, and they're expecting to see the museum, and then all of a sudden they find out, well, you got to do it by appointment, and they don't have time to do it by appointment.
Right.
And,
they're only in town for a couple days.
Yeah. And if you call and try to set an appointment, you can't get somebody to come and meet you there at that time. So it's just been something that hadn't been accessible enough to people. And I think with the direction that you're taking it, the things that you have planned, and with the move, I think the move is a great thing for the museum. Yeah. The addition and the things that the construction company is going to do for it is just going to make it better. And I'm just excited and happy and looking forward to it reopening and getting this thing going back again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we're thrilled to have you on our team, and everything that you've done for Joe for the past 40 some odd years and beyond that. I just hope you know how much you're appreciated, and the things that you've done have made a difference. And there were a bunch of years where people weren't carrying the torch for Joe, and you were. Yeah. So thank you very much.
We were trying, and sometimes we were beating our head against the wall, just like you do with any type of endeavor like this. But we never quit, and we may have backed away every now and then, but then all of a sudden Joe's name pops back up, and it's like wildfire again.
Right, struck while the iron's hot.
And so we tried to continue keeping this thing going, and we're happy to see it where it's at now.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and just can't tell you how much I appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate you coming here, and look forward to working with you forever how long we got to do it, and looking forward to great things.
Awesome. Thanks, Lester.
Thank you, Dan.
And now it's time for a segment called What'd You Think, Mom?, where we talk to my mom, who just listened to the interview with me, and we ask her what she thinks. This is my real, actual mom. Her name is Lori, but I've always just called her Mom. Can you say something to prove you're my mom?
Yeah, I'm the person who knows that one of the things you really liked about this interview with Lester Erwin was finding out you have a kindred spirit because he's a Yankees fan.
All right, so what did you think of the Lester Erwin interview?
I thought it was so important because we've talked in previous episodes about how critical it is to capture firsthand memories, firsthand knowledge while you can, because the window closes so quickly. And you just did that. And I don't know of too many firsthand windows that are even available here in the Greenville area or elsewhere.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that I kept thinking was that it's so weird that there are people still alive who knew Joe. You know, we think of him as being banned after the 1919 World Series and don't realize that he still lived another 30 years after that. And it's like looking at pictures of the civil rights movement and thinking like, oh, that was a million years ago. And it's like, no, a lot of those people are still alive. And,
Hello.
Right. But, you know, like the people who were in the movement, not just alive during it, but people marching and giving speeches, like they're still people and they're our parents' or grandparents' ages. And
Right.
that is the same thing. You know, Joe played 100 years ago, so people don't really think of him in that same vein, that there are people alive now who knew him and interacted with him and shopped at his liquor store and knew him in the community, and they are still around, but they're going quickly.
Right.
So to be able to talk with Lester and talk with some of the other people in the family or in the community who knew him, like you said, I think that is important to get those stories on record and know what he was really like as a person.
And for us looking forward to reopening the museum and having them throw out phrases about what was on the mantle and how he walked into the office and this was there and this was there, and being able to set that up and have it be that way from first eyewitness experience.
Right. Lester mentioned a couple different times that he was kind of scared of Katie when he was a little kid. Who was somebody that you were afraid of as a kid for no real reason? Somebody that you just, either a family member or
Yes.
were there people that later in life you're like, there was really no reason for me to be afraid of that person, but boy was I.
When you're a little kid and you might have a relative, whether it's an aunt or an uncle, where you saw someone and they just looked so intimidating, and as an adult, even a young adult, I got to see them in a different light, whether it was through an experience being together with them and having them make a comment, or just a look that they gave to someone where you realized, I might have misread that. And it's a gift to have that. But when you're little and you're, hiding behind your mom's leg because you don't want to be by that person, it's very real. And so when he said that about Katie, I just kind of laughed.
Yeah, I think everybody has had that experience with somebody in their family or just being out in public and seeing an older person and being intimidated. I think that is more what he meant. I don't think he was scared of Katie, just intimidated by her because she had this strong presence about her.
I don't know. He used the word scared more than a few times. How I interpreted his words, his carefully spoken words, was that he realized that she was a woman of strength and self-assured, and maybe that wasn't so common to see around here or anywhere really at that time in the 50s. That was not the place of a woman. I hate to say those words, but that's the reality. So for her to be a strong woman, I'm sure that was intimidating and scary. But even within the stories that he tells about memories, recollections that he had of interactions between Katie and Joe, or stories that he's heard of or whatever, and he makes reference to, Katie making the decision and Joe going along with it. Well, that tells you a lot.
Right.
On both sides.
Right, absolutely.
So the trust there between them and all that. The very first time he said he was, can I be honest and say I was scared of her? I keep picturing the wedding picture of Katie and Joe standing side by side, and does she even reach his shoulder? Maybe her hat does. And this diminutive little woman who's a powerhouse, scaring, an impressionable 5-year-old little boy.
Yeah.
Some of the other things he talked about that I just thought were interesting when he went into a little bit of his own personal history, and he talked about his dad working in a mill-related activity, not necessarily working in the mill the way we would think of a mill worker, but a hard job nonetheless for the physicality of it, and that he pushed a dope wagon, which is an interesting turn of phrase. And of course, finding out what he meant by that is a dope wagon actually just being like a portable canteen for the workers within the mill, because God forbid they should come away from their stations.
Right.
But having the wagon get the nickname of that because of the Coca-Cola ingredients and other, Pepsi was the same way. The medicinal purposes of what early sodas were back then, and how they had a few coca leaves in there. So yes, there's a spin on the name, for example, with Coca-Cola, but also nothing like a little pick-me-up for the mill workers to get through
that productivity.
Exactly.
I don't know why, but I always feel really great about 12:45 every afternoon.
So his dad went 3 times spinning around the mill in an 8-hour shift, let's say. That's a lot of coca.
But I think that just goes to, and Lester touched on this, goes to show you that from a very early age, Lester saw the work ethic, and that was something that was prevalent in his life. And he's 74 years old right now and still wants to work every day, 5 or 6 hours a day, he said, if he can.
Right.
So like there's something to be said about having that mentality and that mindset this late in life, or in life at all. Some people never have that mentality.
I've heard of Lester for many years. I've never met him, still have not met him, and I look forward to the day when I can meet him. I think his words about his parents' work ethic, his mom and his dad, and how Lester himself reacted when you would ask him questions about what was Lester's greatest play, or what was, he always deferred. It was never about him. It was about the people around him, whether it was on the field or in his family or wherever it was. The team that he put together to promote Joe into being, having a memorial stadium named after him, that speaks to how he was raised, and that is through and through within him. And it was really interesting and very powerful to see that.
Yeah, he's just a super humble man. Something that I struggle with is knowing that Katie and the rest of the Jackson family just kind of wanted to let things be and put Joe's playing career behind him and the scandal behind them. I think a lot of people think that they're doing the right thing by Joe, trying to get his name cleared or inducted into the Hall of Fame. But I'm not sure if that's how Joe would have felt, or if that's how the family felt or currently feels. Where do you see that?
I guess I would look to what Lester's response was when you asked him, how do you want to see Joe remembered? The first thing he said wasn't as the greatest natural hitter who ever lived, even though he recognizes that, and of course we all do. People not associated with the museum see that. You have to. If you're a fan of baseball, you have to. It's all there. The first things he said was that he wanted Joe to be remembered as the gentleman he was, and the community leader he was, and the gentle man he was.
Right.
So Joe is banned from baseball in 1920, 1921, by the time the edicts come out. He lived to 1951. There were 30 years after that. He started in the majors in
1908.
So we're talking one slice of his life defined everything that came after. For the people who knew and loved him here in the Greenville area, it wasn't about that. They knew him before. They knew him during, because he was back here so often with his family connections. And he was here after. And he was a part of the fabric of their lives, a loyal man, quiet, not showy or pushy or obnoxious, but he was there steady like a rock and did what he could to raise those around him. I think that's kind of the job of a place like a museum or whatever. Do you pick a side of, should he be in the Hall of Fame? Yes, the stats say he should be in the Hall of Fame, but you don't want to lose sight of who the person was. And that is a great story in light of all the adversity he went through, his beginnings, his humble beginnings, his hard beginnings, and then the hardship of what he went through coming up into the big leagues, not feeling welcome because he wasn't an educated person playing on an educated team under Connie Mack. But he still had the dignity and the grace to be a gentleman and a good human being.
Well, I think that's kind of the point of a museum, especially when it comes to an athlete. If all we wanted to do was tell the statistics, there's baseball reference for that. You don't need to show up at a building to learn his statistics. That's on the internet. And the people who come through our doors and are here to learn about Joe, we're supposed to tell them about Joe, not about his career. And obviously that's a part of it, and that's a major reason why people know who he is, and that's what got most people interested in his story in the first place, is that he was this great player. Because as good as Buck Weaver was, there ain't no Buck Weaver museum.
Right.
There's no Eddie Seacott museum. They were great players too, and some of the stars of baseball at the time, but they weren't all-time greats. So Joe's statistics do absolutely matter, but that was a part of who he was. It wasn't who he was. And I think our mission at the museum should be to teach people about who he was as a person and in the community. And I think that was something that Lester drove home pretty nicely, that he was a community member first and then a baseball player second.
And in light of his history, that's even more critical. How do you rise up above the adversity and still be a good person, still maintain the spirit within you to be true to yourself, no matter what, no matter what's slung against you, whether it's right, wrong, indifferent, it doesn't matter. The other way Lester lets us know that is how Lester felt about owning Black Betsy when it was given to him, and while he was able to look at it in his home all those years he had it. It wasn't about this is something that's going to be worth something one day. It was the sentimental aspect of it, remembering seeing it in Joe's office against his desk.
Well, I thought it was interesting. He specifically brought up people who asked him, don't you have it in a safety deposit box somewhere? And he's like, no, why would I do that? I wouldn't be able to enjoy it then. And that's such an interesting way to look at things, that the people who have collections and collect memorabilia and artifacts oftentimes do keep them in safety deposit boxes because they're either an investment or they're so afraid of something happening to it that, okay, I have to keep it safe. But you're not enjoying it then.
No.
And that, to me, told you everything you needed to know about Lester as a person. Is he was enjoying it.
Absolutely.
And he specifically said during our interview, he loved looking up at his desk in his office and seeing it there. And no, he wasn't going to the batting cages and using it. And he wasn't, probably often picking it up and swinging, even just in his office. But to know that he can see it and know that it's there and know that he has this incredible piece of history and memento from his family, that was important to him.
And the memories of his own personal experience with it before he did own it.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked the way he took it on road trips to the Field of Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And that little story, okay, honestly, what would you have given to that family?
I hope that family somehow listens to this podcast and sends me the picture that they took, because that would be incredible.
Right.
So if anybody out there knows a friend or family member who has a story like this, put us in touch. Let them know about this episode so we can hopefully track down that photo, because what a story that would be.
And to all their family members who saw the picture and the family came back home and said, yeah, we have this picture. And some guy came up to us and said, this is the Black Betsy bat from Joe Jackson. Yeah, sure it is. When he talked about the tough decision, he's not even thinking about selling Black Betsy. He's casually approached by an acquaintance who says, okay, I'm going to put some things up for auction. I mentioned that you might have this greatly historic bat. Mm-hmm. Are you interested in it? And the conversation starts. And then the decision turmoil starts. And when he mentioned that he has 2 sons, now what do?
You cut it in half.
So many of the things that Lester talked about are important for family members. I'm going to be 62. Going through that with parents and what is important to keep, what is not, and whatever, and what do you do with things, and it's sentimental to one person, not sentimental to another. The thing is, it's worth looking into that and addressing it, but going back to him for a second. He talked about going to lunch with Joe Anders and Joe Thompson, the author of
Growing Up with Shoeless Joe.
I've been lucky enough to know Joe Anders in person and met with him many times and knew he was a protege of Shoeless Joe. Knew him well and was an advocate of Joe's being entered into the Hall of Fame until the day he died, which has been just within the past 5 years, I think, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When Lester said that Joe Anders said that he would sell Black Betsy in a heartbeat for the money that was involved, I think if I were Lester, that would have given me great peace of spirit. knowing someone who was a devotee of Joe Jackson the way Joe Anders was, that you could have peace in your heart knowing at some point it becomes something else.
Right. Well, that's what Lester said in the interview, is that he went to that lunch with those two guys, not looking for their blessing, but looking for their blessing.
And advice, what, not only blessing, but like, first, what would you do? And
Right.
then if I do this,
Right.
how do you feel?
Yeah.
Will you still talk to me?
But
It's hard.
I think they both understood that the numbers that were thrown out there, that's life-changing money.
Right.
It's not $8,000 where, yeah, it'll help you for a couple months. This will change the rest of your life. This will change your children's lives. And he put his kids through college with that money.
Right.
So when you take that into account, yeah, you can sit back here, we're almost 20 years after the fact now, and he thinks if he had to do it all over again, he probably wouldn't have done it. That's easy to say, but it's still...
Right. And knowing the spirit of how Katie and Joe both were in giving to others, Katie giving to charities during life after she passed away and leaving provisions in her will to make sure charities were taken care of. I think Joe and Katie would both been happy to know that Lester's family was benefited so greatly by
Right.
this and future generations of their family. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at that, and I think I would be okay with that too.
Yeah, I agree.
One of the things you talked about was the burden of being Joe Jackson, and every time you meet a new person, wondering if they know you as Joe Jackson, the baseball player, Joe Jackson, the Black Sox member, and will they be bringing it up? And how much of a burden that is to carry through your whole life. That's why family and friends are so critical, because they knew you when. They know who you really are. As long as you're staying true to yourself, they still know who you really are. Of course, fame sometimes changes people. Nothing we've ever heard has led us to believe that that changed Joe in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
If anything, it made him stand even taller because it gave him the opportunities to give back to his community in even greater ways. When Lester was talking about, did Lester talk to Joe or remember talking to Joe or remember conversations between Katie and Joe? It was back to the 1950s where the women folks stayed in the house. Maybe if they enjoyed a meal together, Lester didn't talk about this, but I just know growing up in a house where those were the norms, the women and the girls would stay in the house and do the dishes while the men went outside and sat in a metal lawn chair or a metal glider and talked, and then maybe we would come out after. But it was two separate conversations or whatever. But the memory of Joe and Lester's dad sitting out there just passing the time. When Lester had asked his dad, after Lester had found the shoebox of clippings, and said, "What's all this about? And did you ever talk to him about it?" And Lester's dad saying, "I didn't ask him. I figured if he wanted to say anything, he would have said something." Just that comfort level that it must have brought Joe to have a friend like that.
Right.
A
And those are
friend
the
and family
people
member.
that you want around when you've gone through something like that.
Absolutely.
You know you can be yourself around them and not have to worry, do I have to keep my guard up at all times?
Right.
And wondering, okay, let's say I am honest with this person. Now do I have to worry that they're going to go out and tell my story when clearly I've been so guarded, regardless of what the story is? They obviously made a conscious effort to keep it in-house. So to have somebody who you can trust completely is so valuable. One of the things you said about how it doesn't seem like Joe was changed by a celebrity or that, he was still a good person. That's one of the reasons I felt comfortable devoting my life to him and moving down from Chicago to a new city across the country and taking this job and running this museum. I wouldn't have done that if I thought Joe was a bad person.
Right.
If I thought Joe was guilty, if I thought he took money or was part of this scandal. I only am doing this because I'm confident in who Joe was as a person, and I believe in that and feel like he's somebody who should be stood up for. That's a big part of it for me personally, is knowing in my heart who Joe was.
And I think that feeling, that perception that you and I both have about Joe is validated by the words of his contemporaries on the
Right.
field. I'm not as well researched as you are, But I've never read anything where I saw another player that was a contemporary of him say Jackson was in on it and he got what he deserved, anything like that.
Right.
The quotes you see are where they're talking about his great ability and how he belongs. How can you have so-and-so in there when Joe isn't? And I don't mean to get into the discussion of whether he belongs in the Hall or not. I'm just speaking to who he was as a person,
Right.
and are we getting a correct read on it? It's hard to know who somebody was years after he's passed away. You have to look at the contemporary reports.
Right.
And Lester is a very close connection to
Right.
a contemporary
A
report.
first source document.
That works.
Yeah.
One thing that really kind of threw me for a loop was when he did make the decision to sell it, and it ultimately gets sold at auction, and it gets sold for a number that's close to $600,000. And the person who bought it, whoever that person was, doesn't reach out to Lester and say, how did you come by this? Did you know Joe? Did you,
Right.
Oh my gosh, we would have so many questions. The guy would probably hang up on us. And the guy doesn't reach out to Lester? Come on.
Yeah.
Who are you?
I think the story was out there beforehand of who Lester was, and the basic facts, and obviously the chain of provenance was established in public knowledge.
Yeah. Right. I get that. And I understand he isn't going to write a check or run his card for $600,000 without knowing it's the real deal. But as somebody who's buying that artifact,
Right.
and someone has seen it in its original position within Joe's office,
Right.
and receives it from Joe's widow, who is your mother's cousin and
Right.
who's someone that you look to as an aunt, whose parents were close personal friends of Shoeless Joe Jackson and his wife. How are you not reaching out to that person just to soak in as much information as you possibly can about that whole situation, and
Right.
seeking out the first closest source that you have as an eyewitness to what you just spent $600,000 for?
Even if it was $60, if you're interested enough to buy the piece or to
Right.
want it, why would you not want to reach out? And the only thing that I can think is that maybe the buyer knew how hard it must have been for Lester to sell it and didn't want to rub salt in the wound, or I don't know. I mean, there must have been a reason, because it seems insane to us to not pick up the phone and be like, hey, tell me about Joe.
Right.
Like, that's as simple as that.
Right.
So there must have been a reason. But
Unless it was just a true investor looking to have something that was that historic and put it in a safe deposit box.
yeah, maybe that's possible.
And how about Lester not having a visitation clause in the auction agreement?
Yeah.
One other point, going back to things that we've found out and that we've discussed through different episodes, is careful what you throw out and careful what you dismiss as garbage. When Lester was in his quest to have the stadium named after Joe, and he knew the mortuary director who connected with him to give him the bat after Katie passed away, and then he's directed to the lawyer who was the executor of Katie's estate, who says, oh yeah, once the family had taken everything out of their house, I went through it just to clear out everything or whatever, and went up in the attic, and right there, as soon as I open the attic door, there's this box. So I have this box, and here, Lester, have this box. And
Right.
so Lester goes through it, and there are documents in there that are now hanging in Lester's office.
And some that have been sold at auction.
Right.
Right.
And of course, there's the part of it that are especially key documents because they relate to Shoeless Joe Jackson. But on a family level, you could have the same situation. But historically, that's always the possibility. You never know who was in your family before you. And we did a recent foray out into museum land where we saw another instance of this, where somebody bought something at an auction, a bunch of papers, and looked through years later before they cleared out something. And oh yeah, came across this key document that takes us to another whole episode.
Right.
But the moral of the story is don't just get the dumpster. If you see old stuff, go through it, because you never know what you're going to find.
Right. And after you've gone through it, absolutely you can throw most of it away. But go through it first.
Okay. I also like that in that box were the cards, like a card that he had written, and an address book with his family's contact information in it. And I know for my parents and for my in-laws, I have those books. And when you know the names in there, they're long gone, but it's just like it brings that memory back to you. If you know them, it has a lot more meaning. Obviously, if I gave those same things to you, you would look through it and would have no meaning. But when someone is still alive who knows who those names were, it's that much more meaningful. It's hard to just throw it away.
Right.
And how about Joe being a typical ball player in this way, having his own superstitions, the hairpins in his pocket, which I think you might have talked about before. And now we find out a rabbit's foot, which I think in one of my treasure boxes, I think I probably have a rabbit's foot.
Yeah, that's not a thing that happens anymore.
How did that even start?
Yeah.
And why would...
Yeah, we're going to need to do some research into why people thought that was a lucky thing. Is it because rabbits are so fast that you must have been lucky to catch one?
I don't know, but I'm having serious second thoughts about still retaining mine. Probably can go ahead and throw that one out.
Those are all little stories that seem meaningless when you hear them, but it rounds out the person.
Right.
It shows you that he did have
insecurities where he wasn't going up there thinking he was some hotshot rock star at the plate. He still had his superstitions that he held on to bring him luck and carry him through and whatever.
Right. And when he would go into a little slump, he would wipe the slate clean and start over and be like, all right, well, that superstition's over. I need to start it from scratch.
I liked the part of the conversation where you were talking about what's happening in Greenville today as we speak, where the different mills, there were 18 textile mills to start with in the Greenville area, where they are now being renovated and converted into apartments or condos or whatever it is. It's space that is currently being used, and some of them are really clever in the way they're doing it. I like that Lester is happy about that. I would be if I was someone who grew up here and had that history.
That's a question I've made it a point to ask everybody who is from Greenville, and every single person I've spoken to so far has said they are happy about it. And I'm not sure if that's because the people who are redoing these mills are doing it the right way. If they were doing it a completely different way, would that maybe anger the people? I'm not sure. But whatever the reasoning is, the circumstances we're in, everybody is happy about them that I have spoken to. And that's not to say that everybody in Greenville is, but the people I've spoken to have all said, I'm thrilled with what's happening. I think it's going to preserve the history and tell the stories. But that's one of the reasons I continue to ask people is I want to know, is there something that you want told? Is there a specific story from a mill's history or just the community in general that you think should be preserved? And it seems like the mills that are being refurbished and renovated are doing that in a way that is appropriate.
When you think about the age of some of the mills, we're talking over 120 years old. They have been silent and empty for decades already, and they've become eyesores, many of them. A few, I think 2 or 3 have already been torn down, so they're gone. But maybe their smokestacks still are standing, or their water towers are still standing as monuments to what was there and the people who worked there and worked hard there, children, women, men. So I would think I would feel, and I believe listening to Lester that he feels the same way, it's a thing of respect that they're being renovated and improved, and it's no longer an eyesore. It is a beautiful thing where you can carry it into the future and still respect the past and give it its due.
Well, and I think that's a way to connect to the community through our museum is talking about the textile leagues and talking about those mills, because whether people realize it or not, who are from Greenville or from the area, they all have a relative who either played in the textile leagues or worked at a mill, every single one.
Right.
Whether it was a grandparent or an uncle's grandfather or whoever, but everybody from these communities has some relationship with the mills. And for us to be able to introduce that story to them or reinforce that story to them is something that I think a lot of people are going to really connect with and something that's going to resonate with them.
I think that flows through then to the mill baseball fields, because that was a way that the mill owners built up morale among the employees who were so hardworking to have the competition among the different mill teams. And again, I think Lester concurred with that because he was saying how happy he was that a goal of the new museum is to reach out into the communities and get plaques up, renovate some of those ball fields. And not necessarily to be big things, but to be spots where it can be the the Sandlot,
Mm-hmm.
something a little
Just
bit
a
nicer.
usable space.
Right.
Yeah.
And have plaques up to say what came before.
Right.
The idea that you are walking past or driving past these places where you may not even realize that, yes, it may be Shoeless Joe, but there were other players that were key too who have come through Greenville, and people may not even know. And that goes all over our country, where historic spots are just passed over and fade into obscurity, and no one even realizes, even though you could be standing on top of something.
Right.
So I love the idea that we can do that for the Mill Textile Leagues and give them the same recognition, because here that made Greenville what it was.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, there were other players than Joe who made it to professional baseball, who brought glory to Greenville. So to have them recognized and remembered is, I think, something important.
When Lester was talking about remembering different players who have come through, so many of the people who you have been interviewing who are from the area will talk about the different players who eventually became pro players, who were either playing in the textile leagues or playing through Greenville in some form or another. And every one of them mentions a different name. So he mentioned Nolan Ryan today, and I don't think I've heard Nolan Ryan's name come up before.
Yeah, the Greenville Mets, and then they were a Rangers organization.
Okay.
They were with the Braves for a long time. Now, obviously, the Red Sox. But yeah,
There have been many evolutions of it, right?
Right. And those are just the major league affiliates. I mean, obviously, years back, they were not affiliated, but those players would still make it to the major leagues sometimes. So.
Right. Again, I don't think people even realize that was going on. And especially with Greenville being such a new city in so many ways. Obviously, it's an old city. It's been here, pre-Revolutionary War time. But it has so many transplants who have come here to make it be the thriving place it is now, integrating so well with people whose family history is etched throughout the streets. And I'm sure a lot of people don't even realize that's going on.
All right, so main takeaway from the Lester Erwin episode?
Reach out to primary sources as much as you can while you can, and you may hit jackpot the way you did with Lester. I thought it was interesting the way Lester described going to the house before it was moved to become the museum across the street from Ford Field in Greenville. And he hadn't been in the house in many, many years. And he stood outside that front gate. He looked at the front lawn, the front yard where his dad and Joe would sit on those metal lawn chairs, and just was swept up in the memories, thinking of seeing that as a little kid, sliding into Joe's leg, which is an awesome story. And then once the house was opened as the museum, walking in and having it be kind of eerie, as he said, the first time he walked in, having to wipe the cobwebs of memory away so he could see. I'm stealing that line from somebody. I can't wait to be with him when he walks through in the new version of it.
Yeah. Hopefully there's a clock on the mantle and maybe a trophy or two.
Let's hope.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Dan.
Happy birthday.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's it. In the introduction of this episode, I mentioned a trivia question you can answer to win something. Here's how you can do that. First, make sure you're following us on Twitter @ShoelessPodcast. Then, find the pinned tweet at the top of our profile with the link to the Lester Erwin episode, which asks this week's trivia question. The answer to the trivia question was somewhere in this episode you just finished listening to. Retweet that tweet along with your answer, and we'll announce the winner on Twitter later this month. You don't have to be first, you just have to be right, and you have to be following us. We'll pick one person who answered correctly, and they'll win one of the Black Betsy promotional cards from the lead up to the 2001 eBay auction, which saw Lester sell his prized possession. Black Betsy was Joe's favorite bat, but he did have other bats, many of which also had names. Some of his other bats included Blonde Betsy, Carolina, Old General, Big Jim, and Dixie. We believe Black Betsy was created in 1908 when Joe was around 20 years old. It was turned by Charlie Ferguson, a local fan of the South Carolina Mill teams. He used the northern side of a hickory tree to make the bat, which ended up measuring 36 inches and weighing an astounding 48 ounces. 48 ounces. Ferguson knew that Joe liked dark bats, so he colored it with tobacco juice and then gave it to Wesley Martin, or Captain Martin as he was known around town, who then gave it to Joe. Martin drove the trolley car that Joe rode in to and from his Mill League games. Joe used the bat in the minor leagues and took it with him to Philadelphia when he was sold to the Athletics. When Joe wasn't using his bats, he would rub them down with sweet oil and wrap them in a clean cotton cloth. When he would go back to Greenville or Savannah during the winters, he would always be sure to bring Betsy and his other bats with him because, as Joe said, "Bats don't like to freeze no more than me." Joe believed bats only had so many hits in them, and when he went into a slump, he would discard the dead bat and get a new one. The only bat Joe never discarded was Black Betsy. In 1911, Betsy broke during a game and it sent Joe into a literal depression as well as a multi-week batting slump. He sent the broken bat to the Spalding Sporting Goods Company, who fixed it for him, and then they stamped their brand on the barrel. At some point after that, Joe sent Betsy to Hillerick and Bradsby so they could measure the bat and make copies he could continue using. Sporting goods companies like Spalding and Hillerick and Bradsby offered retail versions of Black Betsy during the 1910s and early 1920s, capitalizing on its popularity. The Spalding version was turned from a high-grade hickory and was 31.4 ounces and 34 inches. It had a dark brown finish and was branded with Black Betsy in the center and Top Flight on the barrel. There were even newspaper articles written about Joe and Betsy all throughout Joe's career. Fans across America would yell, "Give 'em Betsy, Joe!" while he was in the on-deck circle or at the plate. There have been very few players in history more famous than Joe Jackson, and even fewer bats more famous than Betsy. The winner of this episode's trivia contest will get the baseball card with some detailed images of what Betsy looked like in 2001 at the time of the eBay auction, and they'll also receive a membership to the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum, along with an enamel pin that you can only get by being a member. If you'd like to become a member of our museum without taking your chances in a trivia contest, we would be thrilled to have you. Just go to our website, shoelessjoejackson.org, and click the tab at the top that says Join. You can pick the annual membership that fits your current budget, and you'll get some cool stuff in return. It could range from items in our gift shop to a personally guided tour around Greenville where you see all of the spots here in town that are important to Joe's life and career. Our museum is always free to enter, but your memberships, your purchases, and your donations allow us to continue to operate and to continue to serve our community both in person and online. And speaking of entering our museum, that is something we expect you guys to be able to do again soon, probably within the next few months. I know it's been a long hiatus for our physical location, but I promise it will have been worth the wait. We're so excited to show you everything we've been working on, everything we've been planning, and everything we've been curating. From new displays to new photos to new exhibits. We're going to have more artifacts than ever before. We're going to be telling more stories than ever before. And we're going to have more space than ever before. Our gift shop will be bigger and better than ever, and it's going to have new items with new designs that will all tell Joe's story in some small way. If you're not in the Greenville area, start planning your trips now for sometime after opening day of the 2021 baseball season. You won't be disappointed. As for season 2 of the podcast, you won't be disappointed with that either. We already have more than half of the episodes recorded and a few more planned. This season you'll hear stories about the beginnings of the sport of baseball, about Connie Mack and the Philadelphia Athletics, and about Babe Ruth. We'll talk with a collector who can tell us what it feels like to become friends with one of the greatest hitters the game has ever seen after dedicating his life to acquiring anything and everything related to his career. We'll talk to a fan and an artist who can tell us what it feels like to have their favorite team leave town for good. And we'll talk to a graphic designer and historian who can tell us what it feels like to have logos he created on the uniforms of a World Series winning team. If you have questions about the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum, about the podcast, or about anything else, you can reach out on social media or email me at shoelesspodcast@gmail.com, and I'll try to answer them in the next episode. If you want to send in video or audio recordings of your questions so I can actually play them on the show, that's cool too. If you have ideas for guests you'd like us to talk to on the podcast, send us your list. And if you know current or former ball players, managers, broadcasters, journalists, or if you are one, let's talk. A lot of you have liked and subscribed to My Baseball History, and we're so thankful for that. Some of you have even rated and reviewed the show. M. Carter 530 left a 5-star rating and said, "I just finished listening to the Phil Dixon episode, and that's all it took for me to subscribe and leave this review. I came into this episode with no knowledge of this podcast and just added it because it sounded interesting. What an amazing interview, and I love the ability to see photos and accompanying info as the episode progressed. Dan's mom is a super knowledgeable woman that helped me re-examine some aspects of the interview I didn't pay close attention to. Finishing it off with an extremely well-researched and interesting answer to a listener's question was a great finish to an excellent episode. Very happy I found this podcast." Well, thank you so much for those kind words, and we're very happy you found this podcast too. We work incredibly hard on these episodes, so it's always nice to get feedback, especially when it's as nice as that. It's also a huge help when you guys rate and review the show on whatever platform you choose to listen on. 5-star ratings help our podcast get shown on more people's suggested podcast pages, which means that more people are going to hear our show. It just takes a couple seconds of your time, but it really does help us a lot. And of course, liking us on social media, interacting with our posts, and sharing things with your friends is great too. No matter how you choose to support us, even if it's just by listening, we appreciate you being here. Until next time, I'm Dan Wallach, and this is My Baseball History.